Chapter 834. Good luck, got you. Invisible threads emanated over as Panatia said that. They quickly wrapped around Gehrman Sparrow as though she was binding him into a cocoon. At this moment, the figure in a black clergyman robe suddenly turned thin, transforming into a paper figurine covered in metal rust. Klein's figure appeared outside the grayish-white mill as he ran frantically towards the depths of the town. He was a person who had seen the eternal blazing sun's true body and lived. He had a certain level of resistance towards a spirit-body impact, and the inclination of a loss of control brought about by a mythical creature form. Furthermore, Panatia wasn't a complete mythical creature. Therefore, even without the gray fog's help, Klein was able to recover from the racking headache. As he suppressed his body's mutation, he sensed that he had been inflicted with ailments. While collapsing, he used his violent coughing as a cover for him to use paper figurine substitutes. Paper figurines weren't mystical items, nor did they have any spirituality. Hence, Klein wasn't afraid that it would trigger a reaction from the core seal behind Cheney's gate. Hence, he had brought quite a number with him. As Klein ran forward, he rubbed his right thumb and middle finger, and lit up the flour piled inside the mill. Boom! The flour burst into flames as the mill was sent flying. The windmill outside collapsed to the ground as Panatia's figure crumbled bit by bit in the intense blast and scarlet flames as though she was a mirror. Almost at the same moment, her white-robed figure appeared behind Klein. Her loose, pulled-back hair instantly flared up and wildly extended in Klein's direction. Pa! As Klein snapped his fingers to ignite a tree leaf beside him, he controlled Senor to use Mirror Leap to appear in a window on a two-storied residence beside Panatia. Then he attempted to make the terrifying woman's eyes reflect Senor's figure to complete the wraith possession. Scarlet flames suddenly leaped up and enveloped Klein's body, making him vanish from where he was as he appeared in a flame tens of meters away. As for Panatia's gem-like eyes, they seemed to hide mirrors that reflected figures wearing an old triangular hat and dark red coat. They overlapped one another and descended into chaos. Klein didn't hesitate to let Senor leave the window, transforming into a werewolf state to charge the demoness. Yes, Klein had already determined that Panatia was a demoness, and she was a demoness at the demigod level. The strands of black hair, as well as the invisible transparent threads, flared up, forming a ludicrous spiderweb that enveloped Senor, whose body was covered with thick, short hair. However, just as they made contact, Admiral of Blood's figure instantly phased away, causing the black hair and illusory demoness threads to pass through it. Without being able to touch him, it was obviously unable to bind him. He had taken his wraith form. Humph! Panatia's expression didn't change at all. All she did was produce a harumph. Suddenly, the thick hair strands and illusory threads that made contact with Senor burst into dark and silent black flames. They used spirituality as fuel, turning the wraith into a torch. Pa! 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 Senor turned back into a werewolf from the burning as his limbs fell to the ground from the flame injuries. With that, a sequence 5 wraith perished completely. And at this moment, Klein had repeatedly snapped his fingers, jumping into different columns of fire, and using his marionette's sacrifice to escape deeper into the town. With a few flashes, he had pulled open a gap of hundreds of meters from Panatia. Suddenly, Klein felt his forehead burning hot. His lungs began to heave as he panted loudly and emitted heated air. As he had been hit by the impact of seeing an incomplete mythical creature's form, he had been a little too slow at using paper figurine substitutes. He had failed to swap out his ailment, and he had suffered some of the damage. Klein had originally imagined that he just needed to persist until he escaped Panatia's range of influence, but to his surprise, his condition was worsening faster than he expected. Furthermore, despite having opened up a gap of hundreds of meters, he didn't escape the signs of being infected. Thud. Just as he was about to continue using Flaming Jump, Klein's knees buckled as he collapsed to the ground without successfully snapping his fingers. Immediately, he heard Panatia's pleasant laughter in his ears. Even if you were to escape to the other side of town, there's no way to escape my ailments. You ought to know that back in Backland, the entirety of East Borough was immersed in the plague fog I created. Apart from the most distant Empress Borough and West Borough, all the other areas were significantly affected as well. This She's that Lady Despair who cooperated with Mr. A. She's one of the true murderers behind the great smog of Backlund. Klein felt his mind go adrift as he found himself become very sick while reeling in pain and despair. Although it still wasn't lethal, the irresistible coughs prevented him from using most of his beyonder powers. Panatia walked over as her beautiful eyes were stained with an indescribable color of bloodthirst. It was like a tramp finally seeing a sizzling steak after starving for days. In her hands were what was left of Señor's torso and 2 broken limbs. This was apparently meant to be her stockpile of food. Your finger snap sounded good. I believe the taste of those 2 fingers should be pretty good. Panatia looked at Gehrman Sparrow as he coughed in the distance, speaking with the tone of a raving lunatic. Just as she finished her sentence, she raised her hand and stuffed Señor's index finger into her mouth. She bit down on each segment, producing crushing sounds. Klein watched this scene with a blurred vision. In his grogginess, he felt his fingers also suffering such excruciating pain. At this moment, he knew that Lady Despair Panatia was already partially mad because she had eaten too much flesh from other beyonders. Although with her knowledge of mysticism, she would have definitely waited for the beyonder characteristics to seep out before partaking in her meal. The deceased had been trapped in here without any food, making them each other's targets. It was inevitable that they slowly lost their minds as they approached insanity. How could she remain fine eating such meat? Just as Klein was reeling in despair and wondering what method he could use to save himself, he saw the crimson moonlight suddenly turn bright. He saw Panatia's face colored with a look of horror. Without hesitation, she turned around and charged into a nearby building and slammed the door. As Klein felt his illness alleviate significantly, he hurriedly looked up into the sky. He saw that the crimson moonlight was already penetrating the fog, appearing clear as it illuminated the town. His heart stirred as he recalled what Panatia had previously said. He immediately struggled and hobbled into another building beside him without forgetting to lock the door. Once the crimson moon turns clear, there will be changes here. It will become extremely dangerous. Chapter 835. The figures coming and going after rushing into the building and closing the door, Klein realized that the curtains behind the windows were constantly in a drawn state. Only some faint crimson moonlight seeped in, lighting up the room slightly. He didn't bother making any additional observations as he found a wooden chair and sat down. He attempted to enter cogitation to calm his inclinations towards mutating. Since he had witnessed a saint-leveled beyonder's incomplete mythical creature form, how could he survive it that easily? This wasn't the mysterious space above the gray fog that came with recovery effects. As Klein was able to withstand mental blows relatively well, he was able to straighten his thoughts out early and prevent himself from losing control, thus allowing him to successfully escape. However, this didn't mean that the problem had been resolved. He sat there, relying on cogitation and his control over his emotions to resist the waves of insane thoughts. During this process, he heard his cheekbones produce crunching sounds. He saw his black hair turn long and thick in an uncontrollable manner as his chest bulged through his clothes while his skin produced granules in the form of meat tendrils. After nearly 30 seconds, Klein finally exhaled and relaxed significantly. He had completely recovered from the effects that Panatia's incomplete mythical creature form brought. He even gained some new knowledge. The level she was at had despair at its core, making her good at creating and spreading plagues. The insanity and mutation from witnessing a mythical creature not only produced the symptoms of losing control of one's pathway, but it also comes with the traits of the other party's sequence. Back then, I was nearly baked by the eternal blazing sun. And this time, I nearly became a demoness. Klein looked down at himself, restoring his skin, chest, and hair to normal. If he wasn't a faceless, aside from letting those meat tendrils sink into his body, he would have to rely on external forces to resolve the problem. Without the time to poignantly sigh or analyze the situation, Klein slowly stood up and cast his gaze towards the tightly drawn, dark-colored curtains as he attempted to figure out his current situation. His expression suddenly changed because he heard rowdy murmurs outside the street. At that instant, he felt that, apart from him and Lady Despair Panatia, the uninhabited town suddenly had many residents. They were loitering across the streets and alleys, greeting one another as they discussed whether to only buy bread or be extravagant, and buy a pound of beef. The foggy town suddenly seemed to come to life. However, none of the figures entered the buildings that line the streets. They seemed to keep coming and going across the street, producing voices that one would find difficult to believe to be conversations, as they sounded more like the deep growling of savage beasts. Klein couldn't imagine the scene outside. All he knew was that even a demigod-level demoness had to hide from the danger. He retracted his gaze and thought deeply for a few seconds, silently muttering, "I can't head out. But I can't stay in here either. Who knows when that crimson moon will be covered by fog again?" Allowing Panatia to regain her freedom of movement. "When the time comes, with us being so close, there's no way for me to escape. But how do I move without heading out?" In his silence, Klein slowly turned his body and faced the pitch-black spired cathedral. According to Lady Despair Panatia, that cathedral was the only place she didn't dare explore. It was as though entering the cathedral was the only way to escape her hunt. Of course, a demoness like Panatia wasn't necessarily speaking the truth, but Klein believed that she wasn't likely to lie regarding such matters. After all, to her, he was her prey, her delicacy. Besides, Panatia back then was using her speech and charm to entice him bit by bit, designing a trap for him so as to capture her prey. With a demigod's confidence, it was unlikely she would reveal information as a bluff. In addition, at such times, speaking the truth was the safest and most reassuring option. There was no need to worry about the prey escaping ahead of time, due to the detection of a lie. Unless her half-mad state causes her to habitually lie. Otherwise, it shouldn't be a problem. Klein, who was out of options, quickly made up his mind. He lowered his left hand and made creeping hunger turn transparent. Although he knew that traveling was useless, he still held out hope because this was the point when the crimson moon was at its clearest. There was no obstruction, and it was round like a silver plate. During such times, Mr. Dorr could transmit his shouts into the ears of his descendants from where he was lost. Traveling was enhanced, and anomalies happened, so it wasn't something impossible. Klein's figure rapidly phased away, but seconds later, his body outline appeared again where he stood. "I can't enter the spirit world, to the point of not even sensing it. As a beyonder power, traveling only has a third of its uses. It can barely be used as invisibility." Klein muttered silently as he concluded his experiences and lessons. However, he was puzzled about one point. Traveling's phasing away and turning transparent is due to the unique traits of the spirit world. So why would it be effective? Klein pondered for about 10 seconds before he came to a rough idea. Every person must be connected to the spirit world, because one's astral projection is located there. It can obtain all kinds of abstract information, which is the reason why revelations can be obtained from divination. Therefore, when we are converted into a hidden and secret state, our connection with the spirit world becomes part of it. This can explain why I can still use the unique traits of the spirit world, but am unable to enter it. This is because the former had a portion of it hidden away. I didn't have the time to consider it before, and had attempted flaming jump. I was met with success, and this also requires the unique traits of the spirit world. After confirming this point, Klein raised his right hand and snapped his fingers, attempting to ignite a half-melted candle in the neighboring building. He wanted to use flaming jump to pass through the neighboring buildings and slowly approach the spired cathedral. Once the crimson moon was hidden by the fog, he would reassess the situation to decide if he would take the risk and hide inside. A scarlet flame was set ablaze in the neighboring building as it slowly expanded and illuminated the surroundings. At that moment, the streets outside suddenly turned abnormally silent. All of the beast-like growls disappeared. The figures that loitered on the streets seemed to turn to face the building, using their gazes in an attempt to penetrate the windows. Klein instantly broke out into a cold sweat. He didn't dare to leap over as he instinctively snapped his fingers and extinguished the flame. After a brief silence, the rowdy murmurings sounded again. The indistinct figures continued walking here and there. Only then did Klein heave a sigh of relief. He raised his hand to wipe the cold sweat from his forehead. He discovered that he had unknowingly made several mistakes after entering the foggy town. In such a dangerous and bizarre environment, he hadn't divined if he should light the candle in the neighboring building. My spiritual intuition should have warned me, but it didn't. From the looks of it, after the gray fog was screened away, my spiritual intuition and sense for danger are no longer enhanced. Now, I'm just a little stronger than a marionettist of the same level. I'm far from being crazy powerful. It's because of this that I was incited by Panatia's instigator powers to look at her wound. I didn't receive any premonition for danger, and subconsciously believed that it wouldn't be a problem with a marionette in between us. Klein temporarily didn't have time to have an after-action review of his previous battle. He placed his attention back onto approaching the cathedral without heading out. He began scrutinizing himself and his mystical items beyond her powers. Suddenly, his eyes lit up as he found a solution. This solution stemmed from a traveler's door opening which he thought was useless. This beyonder power was completely overshadowed by teleportation under normal circumstances, but in this mysterious and bizarre foggy town, just its usage of the unique traits of the spirit world became more useful. Klein wasn't in a rush to take action as he took out the gold coin which Senior used to reside in. Using divination to question his spirituality, he obtained the answer that he should penetrate the wall. And without any way to obtain a revelation from the spirit world, he could only choose to trust himself. He then walked to the wall that was shared with the neighboring building and pressed his hands on it. Silently, Klein passed through the stone wall and entered the next building. He followed the terrace houses until he arrived at the final one. According to his initial impressions of the town, he was already very close to the spired cathedral. He didn't need more than 2 flaming jumps to reach it. At that moment, the crimson moonlight that penetrated the dark-colored curtains didn't weaken. He could vaguely see figures coming and going like they were leading a normal life. Without being capable of moving further away, all Klein could do was sit down on a wooden chair that was a distance away from the windows. It was almost completely dark here with deep, dark shadows. Only at this point did he have the time to recall the details of his encounter with Demoness Panatia. She's actually the murderer that caused the Great Smog of Backlund. Tens of thousands of people died because of her. Even more people suffered the pain of losing their loved ones. Old Kohler, who worked hard to live, Mamliz, who worked hard to raise her 2 daughters. Klein closed his eyes as he lifted his head and took deep breaths. He forced himself to extricate himself from the anger and hatred that suddenly surged in him as he calmly observed the turn of events. Unfortunately, I didn't let Senor wear that flower of blood. Otherwise, he should still be able to put up a struggle. However, there wasn't a choice. While possessing me, wearing a ring corresponding to a rose bishop while entering Cheney's gate would be equivalent to blasting myself apart. Now the only mystical item I can use is Creeping Hunger. There's Zombie Baron of Corruption, Desire Apostle, and Traveler inside. Yes, I should try to see if I can contact the gray fog by praying while the crimson moon is clear. It doesn't work. I can now confirm that even with a marionette between us, I'll still be affected by a demonist's charm and incitement. Since Panatia can release a plague on a large scale, why didn't she attack me in secret in such a concealed manner? Instead, she waited until I nearly lost control from witnessing her incomplete mythical creature form, and exposed my location before spreading the ailments? She can definitely do it. The Great Smog of Backlund is the best proof. There are 2 explanations. First, it's because I was personally sent here by the angel. This made her place a great deal of attention on me, worried that spreading the plague in advance would be detected by my spirituality. Second, she's afraid of something, so she doesn't dare to blanket the area with her plague. If it's the latter, there are other dangers here. As Klein thought over the matter, he felt his spiritual perception trigger as a chill ran down his back. Almost at the same time, he saw that a deep shadow that blanketed him and the surroundings suddenly shrank, drilling towards his nostrils, mouth, and ears. Chapter 836. Tossing food. At that moment, the shadow seemed to turn corporeal. It was ice cold and moist, and it instantly bound Klein within it like he was a mosquito in amber. Klein's figure was squashed and compressed as he regressed into a piece of paper, rapidly turning into mush. Paper figurine substitutes. Having sensed the danger ahead of time, he had made timely use of paper figurine substitutes. His black-robed figure appeared on the other end of the dining table as he opened his mouth, producing a bang sound. At this moment, Klein's mind suddenly turned adrift as he found his surroundings blurry and unclear. He instantly understood what was happening. He had been forcefully pulled into a dream. And with this, he determined one point. His abnormal ability of maintaining his lucidity and rationality in dreams had already solidified and become one with him. There was no need to use the gray fog to do so. After a brief struggle, Klein suddenly snapped awake and saw the shadows in the building slowly surging at him like a tidal wave. Bang! He opened his mouth and produced an extremely mighty air bullet. This bullet struck the shadow, producing a huge swath of white. The shadows around the whiteness immediately receded and filled it to the brim, returning everything to normal once again. Klein took this opportunity to roll to the side and turned his left glove pale with a tinge of dark green. With a clap, the spot he stood at was smashed by a lump of flesh and blood that flew out from the shadow, covering the dark red carpet that was covered with strange mold. In an unobvious manner, Klein had a feeling that he was being weakened. Without any time to think deeper into the matter, he immediately made his feet produce an icy layer that emanated cold air. White frost crept up and rapidly froze the shadow. Underneath the crystalline frost was a squirming and warping pitch blackness, like oil that had its own life. Zombie's ice stun. Klein did another flip and changed his position while making his glove produce black granules that were profound and dark. Right on the heels of that, he straightened his body, and facing the shadow beneath the layer of ice, he said a word filled with foulness, a word that came from the devil language. Slow. Suddenly, Klein saw the shadows squirming slow down. Clearly, it was in an extremely sluggish state. However, his thoughts had also turned sluggish, preventing him from dealing any follow-up attacks. His language of foulness had been distorted, and although it was clearly directed at the shadow, it had been distorted to target the entire living room, hence, affecting himself. In just seconds, Klein extricated himself from the slowed state, and without any thought he lunged for the dining table, picking up a plate with half a piece of steak and throwing it at the shadow. During this process, his left glove remained dark black, but it had a sinister and noble vibe. Bribe. He had used the steak to bribe the enemy, weakening the other party's offensive, defensive, and controlling abilities. At this moment, the figure suddenly shrank back into the corner of the wall, allowing the dining plate to smash and shatter into the melting ice. Then, the figure surged upwards, taking the form of a pitch-black figure with a hooded robe. In the palm of the figure, a transparent and blurry book appeared in front of him. It was accompanied by a distant and indistinct chant. I came, I saw, I record. Just as the chanting sounded, the book rapidly flipped through the pages and produced a burning white spear. Mr. A? Has he gone completely mad? He dares to use fire-related beyonder powers in such an environment? Klein's heart tightened as his thoughts raced. He hurriedly rushed towards his opponent and held his left hand behind him. Creeping hunger was quickly tainted with the dark colors of corruption, before condensing a ridiculous great sword that seemed to be combined from scarlet magma and blue-hot flames. Thump! Klein's footsteps were heavy as he bent his back, pulling his shoulder back as he forcefully delivered a strike with his left arm. The muscles on his arm bulged as he swung the sword of lava. The resplendent great sword cleaved down on the fiery spear, sending sparks of white, blue, and red scattering in every direction as they ignited the chairs and curtains. The murmurs outside the street had long vanished. All the indistinct figures had turned over, and there was extreme silence. After shattering the fiery spear with a cleave, Klein bent his knee and genuflected, snapping his fingers with his right hand. Pa! The flames in the entire room were extinguished. Klein didn't move any further. He had a nagging feeling that a dense array of gazes were trying to see through the curtains to seek out any abnormalities. The hooded man formed of shadows didn't take any action as well. Although he was acting crazy just moments ago, he seemed to have sensed the inexplicable horror that was slowly approaching. In the dark room with tiny hints of crimson moonlight, Klein was genuflecting while the other was standing close to the wall. It was as though the two of them had turned into stone statues. In the unbearable silence, time passed by abnormally slowly. All Klein did was count 10 seconds, and it felt like an hour had passed. Finally, the beast-like growls sounded once again in a staccato, disjointed manner, and the indistinct figures outside began walking again, returning back to the streets. Almost at the same time, Klein obtained initial control of his target's spirit body threads. The hooded man's actions of pouncing forward instantly turned sluggish. Without any hesitation, Klein bent his body and circled the area, preparing to take advantage of his opponent's delay to disrupt any of his subsequent counterattacks and slowly turn him into a marionette. At this moment, his nose suddenly felt an itch as he couldn't help but open his mouth. Achoo! Klein sneezed and lost his control over the spirit body threads. Furthermore, his throat began to hurt as mucus began to take form. He had caught a cold. He actually caught a cold in the intense battle. After suspecting that his opponent was Mr. A, Klein had actually been wary against a demonist's ailment based on his past experience when fighting Mr. A. He had been placed at a significant disadvantage back then, but in a battle that didn't give him time to think, he had made a mistake. His constitution had long weakened due to the plague from the actual demoness Panatia. He had no way to wait until the marionette conversion completed. He didn't even have a chance of obtaining a deeper level of initial control, and use air bullets to deal a lethal strike. Achoo! As Klein sneezed, he rolled away. Meanwhile, he switched creeping hunger to the Baron of Corruption state, and attempted to use his distortion powers to reduce the effects of his cold. Of course, thanks to his bribe from before, his condition wasn't too serious. All it did was affect his control over the spirit body threads, and not make him incapable of fighting. While rolling away, Klein noticed from the corner of his eye that his opponent was leaving his shadowy state. The hood slipped backward, revealing a face that looked beautiful like a female. It was none other than Mr. A. This Aurora Order Oracle had actually managed to survive this long despite the harsh environment. However, his eyes were already bloodshot. He looked at Klein as though he was looking at a delightful delicacy. The hunger that was innate and instinctive wasn't concealed at all. At that moment, Klein's mood didn't wane because he still had sufficient strength to do battle. What he was most worried about wasn't Mr. A, but that their escalating battle would produce flames and attract the danger outside. When that happens, there was no way the two of them could escape death. Hunger. The immense hunger has made Mr. A lose his rationality and no longer care about the loitering figures. If I can slightly alleviate his hunger, he should stop attacking and patiently wait until the crimson moon is once again hidden by the fog. Give him some food. As his thoughts raced, Klein nearly sliced off a piece of his flesh to throw at Mr. A. Thankfully, he thought of something in the nick of time. He had food on him. They were the dried mushrooms that Frank Lee had produced. It was said to be a crossbreed between beef and the flesh of a rose bishop. As long as there was fish and water, it could keep reproducing. As this was a new species in a subtle sense, making it not directly related to a rose bishop, Klein had placed it with herbal powders he often used like slumber flower, without removing them. He wasn't afraid that it would trigger any anomalies within the core seal behind Cheney's gate. Achoo! With another sneeze and another roll, Klein had taken out the dried mushroom and thrown it at Mr. A. Perhaps the smell of beef had attracted him, or perhaps it was the mutual sense shared between rose bishops. Mr. A immediately stopped attempting to flip through his illusory book. As he caught the mushroom, he stuffed it into his mouth, chewed and swallowed it. The hunger pangs that were written in his eyes gradually lessened, but the way he looked at Klein remained the same. Klein threw the remaining dried mushrooms at Mr. A, who caught them. Without any hesitation, he cleanly ate them. His vision finally turned for the better. Glancing at the indistinct figures loitering outside the windows, he stepped back into a corner, fusing into the shadows. Phew! Klein heaved a sigh of relief and retreated to another corner of the wall. Mr. A actually isn't dead. I have to say that in such an environment, a rose bishop's abilities can provide immense help. Just using the stored flesh and eating himself can make him last quite long. Of course, the fact that Mr. A hasn't been killed by Lady Despair Panatia implies his strength. However, the demigod-level powers he recorded must have been used up. As Klein thought, he deliberated over his words, wishing to sound out Mr. A for more information. Have you found any clues on how to leave? There was silence as Mr. A didn't give an answer. His insanity has made it impossible to talk to him? Klein pondered for 2 seconds and said a name, Leo Master. This was the name of the Aurora Order's Saint of Darkness who had dissociated personalities. After a brief silence, Mr. A's slightly hoarse voice sounded again. He has been sent in here as well. Indeed, only matters regarding the Aurora Order elicits a response. Klein frankly said. No, he is trapped inside the ruins of the Battle of Gods. Without waiting for Mr. A to say a word, he continued. Why don't you enter the cathedral? Mr. A said in a muddled manner. It's very dangerous, very, very dangerous. It's also dangerous outside. All the dangers stem from there. All the people who vanished would reappear during the crimson moon. Before he could finish his sentence, the tiny bit of crimson moonlight that passed through the curtains suddenly turned extremely dim. Chapter 837. The hangers. As the crimson moonlight dimmed, a thought surfaced in Klein's mind. The crimson moon is about to be covered by fog again. Just as this thought appeared, the indistinct, loitering figures outside vanished as though they had evaporated into thin air. The beast-like growls also came to a halt. The environment has been restored to its previous state. Demoness of Despair Panatia can move about freely again. Mr. A will no longer have any qualms about the danger outside. He can unleash a barrage of attacks to capture his prey. Klein instantly came to a conclusion as he raised his right index finger and snapped, igniting the leaves of a tree tens of meters away. He wanted to open up a gap with Mr. A to prevent himself from getting sicker. At the same time, he wanted to determine if he should take the risk of entering the ancient cathedral. With respect to his present situation, Klein already had a plan in mind. It was to use Mr. A's potent and multifarious abilities to draw Panatia's attention. After all, to her, a shepherd and a marionettist weren't any different when it came to meat quality. They could both fill her stomach, so her priority was definitely on who was easier to deal with. When the time comes, both parties would definitely engage in a battle, and Klein needed to find an opportunity to strike down Panatia. Just as the scarlet flame soared and engulfed Klein, he saw Mr. A turn into a shadow and meld into the surroundings once again. It was unknown where he hid himself. He ran. Aren't you the crazy Mr. A? Shouldn't you continue pursuing your prey? Why did you run? Klein's gaze froze as he couldn't help but twitch the corners of his mouth. His figure vanished amidst the flames before appearing in flames tens of meters away. Just as Klein leaped out of the fire, he felt his forehead burning once again. His lungs felt heavy as his breathing became rapid and difficult. Plague. Demoness of Despair Panatia had spread her plague once again. To Klein, this beautiful lady in a pure white robe had already floated somewhere in midair at some point in time, walking towards him. Beneath her feet were countless transparent and thin lines that formed a spider's web. They were connected to the surrounding buildings and trees, fully covering half the street. In the eyes of this demigod-level demoness, the intense hunger pangs were gone. The obvious bloodshot look in her eyes wasn't there. And the way she looked at Gehrman Sparrow was one of insanity and teasing. It was as though she wanted to drain his ability to resist, bit by bit, making him feel the deepest, most heavy, and most painful despair. Klein held back his urge to cough as he snapped his fingers again, causing the tree beside the cathedral to burst into flames. His figure was immediately engulfed by the fire as he rapidly faded away and appeared above the tree. He had appeared amidst the gorgeous flames. Right on the heels of that, Klein hurriedly jumped to the ground, somersaulting to the side of the ancient cathedral. At this moment, his body suddenly turned cold as he found that his feet, thighs, and waist were covered in thick layers of ice. And surrounding him was an accumulation of frost as the temperature declined rapidly. Klein clenched his teeth, holding back the horror within him. He followed his plan, and he reached out his arms in an abnormally rigid fashion, pressing it straight onto the wall. The creeping hunger on his left hand turned transparent. In silence, Klein passed through the thick, pitch-black wall and entered the spired cathedral. The spot where he was standing had a black fireball smash into the wall, just a little too slow. It splashed out like water, burning away the nearby frost and weeds. At this moment, at the top of the ancient cathedral's spire, swirling ravens opened their beaks. Wah, wah, wah. Panatia halted as she looked at the dark cathedral. Bit by bit, her face was dyed with a look of fear. Inside the cathedral, Klein found himself unable to see anything, as it was darker than the outside. As the frost melted, and with him getting accustomed to the dim lights, he finally saw the scene before him. As far as he could see, there were figures being hung up in midair. They were all humans. Some of them were dressed in black classical robes, others in brown jackets. Some were wearing very fluffy skirts, while others had tattered clothes, making them resemble beggars. Some of them had boorish looks, others handsome with cut facial features. Some of them were beautiful, others tender, adorable, and looking youthful. None of them looked the same. No, there was something that they had in common. They were like meat that was undergoing a curing process. They hung from above, swaying gently as their heads were bowed and their eyes rolled back. Klein felt his scalp tingle as he no longer doubted that this place was extremely dangerous as described by Panatia and Mr. A. He held his back to the wall, planning on using door opening to leave to avoid danger the moment anything happened. He would then pass through the wall if he was discovered by the demoness of despair to avoid her attacks. By repeatedly doing so, he could ensure his safety. Whoosh! A cold air blew through the cathedral as the figures and corpses turned around, facing Klein. Their collars were like ropes that left their heads drooping. Klein nearly drew a gasp as he pressed his left palm onto the wall. At this moment, the figures began to sway like wind chimes. They opened their eyes and produced raving-like voices. Hornacis, Phlegria, Hornacis, Phlegria, Hornacis, Phlegria. The voices resounded into one, drilling into Klein's ears as he found it abnormally familiar. This was the raving that he had heard during his advancements in the past. It actually originated from here, from the foggy town. It came from the corpses that hung high in this ancient cathedral. At that instant, not only was Klein's scalp tingling, he even felt his body trembling. Could it be that this foggy town actually originates from the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range? That nation of the Evernight which vanished? Don't tell me that I really am on the mountain? However, why would it be inside this cathedral? These same ravings don't bring about a headache or push me towards losing control. Klein hissed as he spread his hands and clenched it again repeatedly, resisting the urge to pass through the wall. Since he was already inside and had seen the source of the ravings, he believed that escaping probably didn't resolve any problems. Regardless, it's necessary to do a simple search. Otherwise, I wouldn't even know the reason when something abnormal happens to me. After using a gold coin to quickly do a divination, Klein tapped his molars gently and activated his spirit vision. He looked up at the hanging figures and found their spirituality converged. The aura colors looked normal, but they exuded a stiff appearance. There are aura colors. They aren't dead yet? Klein frowned slightly and deactivated his spirit vision. Right on the heels of that, he tapped his left thumb on the first segment of his index finger, planning to observe the spirit body threads. Upon sweeping his gaze across, Klein's pupils dilated because the spirit body threads of the swaying figures looked extremely special. The illusory black threads that corresponded to their bodies were extended in the same direction. The peak of the ancient cathedral. There wasn't a single exception. In Klein's vision, they were like corpses being hung up by their spirit body threads. Before Klein could figure out what all of this meant, he caught a scene from the corner of his eye. His spirit body threads were automatically reaching upwards to the peak of the cathedral, to the source that hung up those figures. This was the first time Klein saw spirit body threads moving autonomously. It was as though they were metals that had come into contact with magnets. They floated upwards uncontrollably, and the fastest thread had already reached its destination. Klein didn't dare imagine the outcome if all his spirit body threads gathered up above. He suspected that he too would become a piece of cured meat that would be hung up to be dehydrated, producing the ravings of Hornacis, Phlegria, along with the wind. For most Beyonders, they could only consider leaving the cathedral in a bid to sever the process of having their spirit body threads attracted, but Klein was different. He was a marionettist. Quickly, he controlled his spirit body threads and pulled them thread by thread. After nearly 30 seconds, Klein finally completed this task. However, his spirit body threads continued floating upwards. He had to constantly pay attention and resist this upward drift. This is one of the dangers lurking inside the cathedral? Klein slowly drew a breath as he no longer leaned close to the walls. Step by step, he ventured deep into the cathedral. Above him, the figures swayed as though they were watching him. After proceeding nearly 30 meters, Klein finally saw something different. It was the pitch-black altar of the cathedral. On the altar was a stone statue. Klein identified the statue when he took a few more steps. It was in the shape of a female human. However, her hips and ribs had two beast legs growing out from each one of them. These limbs were covered in short, thick, and firm black fur. In addition, the statue was surrounded with black bands that seemed to reach out like tentacles. At the statue's feet, there were souls sleeping as though they were holding her up on a pedestal. Klein shifted his gaze and looked at the statue's head, and saw a beautiful face. Klein's gaze froze. That face wasn't unfamiliar to him, because he had been sent in here by that entity. This stone statue's appearance was identical to the eraser angel under St. Samuel Cathedral. She is actually related to this place. That's right. The people she erased are sent here, so it would be odd if she's not connected to this place. What's the connection between her and the fourth epoch's nation of the Evernight on the Hornacis mountain range? That mother of the sky? But if that's the case, why would she be working for the church? Furthermore, such an image does have its resemblance to the demonic wolf that Little Sun mentioned. Many thoughts instantly surfaced in Klein's mind. During this process, he slowly shifted his gaze away in another direction, in the hopes of finding any possible clues. A few seconds later, Klein discovered a figure. It wasn't hung in midair, but was seated diagonally behind the statue. Chapter 838. Seen from the historical void, the figure sitting diagonally behind the statue was an elder in a black robe. He wore a hood and his head was bowed with his eyes closed. By his mouth was a thick, long, and white beard. It was as though he hadn't had it trimmed for years, preventing anyone from telling what he originally looked like. And in Klein's eyes, this hoary elder was even more bizarre than the figures hanging in midair. After his spirit body threads extended out from his body, it didn't drift up to the spot which seemed to hide magnets. Instead, they coiled around his body and back on themselves, making the source and destination one and the same. Ordinary spirit body threads stemmed from inside a spirit body, extended outwards in different directions into infinity. As for the figures that hung from above, the sources of their spirit body threads was no different. The destination which they extended out to was gathered at the top of the cathedral. Thus, it was obvious that there was something wrong about it. This is the reason why he hasn't been hung up? Or should I say, this is how he avoids the danger inside the cathedral? As Klein controlled his spirit body threads to resist the continuous upward drift, he silently muttered and guessed at the reason. Suddenly, he saw a pair of eyes. A pair of pitch-black eyes that looked like an unlit water surface. The elder sitting behind the statue opened his eyes. He was still alive. Klein subconsciously took a step back as he bent his back slightly, holding out his left palm in front of him. Amidst indescribable silence and anxiety, he saw the hoary elder's eyes move slightly, open his mouth slightly, and speak in a muffled manner. Finally, another seer has come here. Another? Beyonders from the seer pathway have entered this cathedral? That's right. Apart from eraser angels' erasing of people, sending them to this foggy town, and those who vanished in the night at the Battle of God ruins would also appear here. Amongst them, there might be a few seer pathway beyonders who attempted to seek out mermaids in those waters, or had successfully advanced and were looking to leave. Seeing that the other party had no intention of immediately attacking him and had the intention to converse with him, he forcefully composed himself and said after some thought, "Why do you say that?" The hooded elder with black eyes and white beard didn't immediately reply as he asked with a muffled voice, "Do you wish to escape? I can tell you how." Klein wasn't moved as he immediately asked, "Then why are you still here?" Since the method to escaping this foggy town was known, why would one stay inside such a dangerous cathedral? The elder drooped his head and chuckled in a throaty manner. "It's because I've died long ago." The hair on Klein's back stood on end as he broke out into a cold sweat. He was speechless. He could tell that the elder wasn't in existence in the form of a soul. Seeing no response, the elder slowly lifted his head and swept his glance at Klein in his Gehrman Sparrow appearance. I've used special Beyonder powers to seek out the void in this world's history and fate. I sliced off a portion of my projection and left it here. It has been maintained to this day. As for my body and my spirit, they have long died and dissipated. This is such a fascinating power. Klein was unable to verify the claim, so all he could do was ask, "Then why are you giving guidance on how to escape to seers who enter?" The elder's voice remained muffled. "After you open the door, the history and fate in here will experience a change. The projection I slice will also vanish. And when the time comes, you will see an urn of ashes. I only wish that they could be scattered in the Srenzo River near Intis's capital, Trier. That is my hometown, the place where I was born." Do you know the place I'm referring to? I've no idea how much time has passed in the real world. He's been imprisoned for at least a century? Klein frankly replied, "They still exist." Excellent, the elder said with a nod, his throat apparently filled with phlegm. Although Klein didn't fully trust the person before him, he believed that knowing more made it beneficial for him to make a judgment. Hence, he decided not to waste any time, for fear of being interrupted again. Then how should I escape? The elder remained sitting in his spot, and said without any obvious movement, "See that wall behind the statue? Do you see an inset?" Klein actually didn't wish to follow his instructions. After all, he had been led by Panatia to do so, resulting in him seeing her incomplete mythical creature form and, hence, suffered from shock and damage. However, he had previously planned on surveying the surroundings in search of clues. Therefore, he ultimately carefully shifted his gaze to look at the wall behind the statue. Engraved on it were short and ancient symbols, but there was an empty spot in the middle, preventing it from being connected as one. The blank area was the size of 2 palms, and was obviously indented. It was as though someone had dug away a brick on its surface. As long as you find the corresponding obsidian rock and insert it, this wall will tentatively be released from a concealed and secret state. It will showcase illusory colors. When the time comes, I'll tell you of a complicated special symbol. It will be the key to opening the door on the wall, allowing you to escape. The elder didn't turn his head as he looked straight ahead and spoke in detail. A complicated special symbol. A key to opening the door. Klein listened to the ravings of Hornacis. Phlegria. Resound with the wind behind him as a symbol suddenly came to mind. It was the vertical eye formed from many secret symbols. It was the information that the Antigonus family's notebook had passed to him by corrupting the misfortune cloth puppet. And the Antigonus family appeared to have a deep connection with the nation of the Evernight on the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range. Could this be the so-called key? Klein retracted his gaze in a calm manner as he asked, "Why did all the seers from before fail?" The elder chuckled and said, "Some of them are as naggy as you are, failing to leave this cathedral before the crimson moon turned clear. They ended up being hung up. It's the case for that fellow who gave himself a handsome face. Likewise for the lady with flawless features." Klein was nearly rendered speechless by the elder's jibe. However, he also learned something. The danger inside the cathedral would greatly increase once the crimson moon turned clear. Even marionettists were unable to control their spirit-body threads. I'll have to constantly take note of the changes in light. Once the crimson moon turns clear, I'll pass through the wall. Klein looked around him, and confirmed that the wall closest to the pitch-black altar was 6 to 7 meters away. Then he quickly came up with an emergency plan. The hooded elder didn't look at him as he continued. The rest weren't very lucky. They encountered enemies that had lost their reasoning, and only wanted them for food. They were then devoured. You have to know that there aren't many Beyonders from the seer pathway to begin with. The ones that can become marionettists are even fewer. The number that can come in here due to various reasons are only a handful. Of course, there are a lot more that were attracted and enticed in here, but it was difficult for them to come all the way here as they. He didn't finish his sentence as he slowly looked up and glanced at the top of the ancient cathedral. He then said with a muffled voice, "Their outcomes were equally tragic." "What do you mean?" If I didn't attempt to steal the notebook, I would have to rely on the ravings from these hanging corpses inside this cathedral, and climb up the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range to seek out the Antigonus family's treasure. Will I be considered as one of those that got attracted or enticed? It's difficult to come in here, and the outcome would be equally tragic? Klein's mind stirred as he began suspecting that the so-called treasure of the Antigonus family was nothing but a trap based on the dilapidated palace and translucent worms he had previously seen from his divinations. He didn't bother asking in more detail as he tried to sound out more important information. Do you know where that obsidian rock is? The elder chuckled. It's in the hands of that demoness of despair. Demoness of despair. So Panatia really is a demoness of despair. Klein had previously addressed Panatia inwardly as such, but that was because he knew that she was called Lady Despair, as well as him being certain that she was a demoness. Hence, he had simplified the two tidbits of information and given her such a nickname. He never expected that the sequence 4 of the demoness pathway was demoness of despair. That will be very difficult for me to obtain that obsidian rock. She's a true demigod. Klein didn't conceal the difficult position he was placed in as he waited to see if the elder had any suggestions. The elder shook his head and said, I'm a person who is long dead. There's very little help I can provide. Didn't you have a marionette when you came in? Yes, but it has already been eaten by the demoness of despair, Klein replied in a seemingly calm manner. The elder sighed and chuckled. I can help you summon him from the history of this world. Just as he said that, Klein saw lines quickly outline themselves beside him, drawing out Admiral of Bloodsignor in his triangular hat and dark red coat. Furthermore, the spirit body threads were still under his control. Klein's pupils immediately constricted as he heard the hooded elder add, It can only be maintained for 30 minutes. Make good use of the time. I'll help you strengthen some of the connections, enhancing your control of the marionette. This way, you can let the marionette use your Beyonder powers, and also allow you to swap locations with him instantaneously. Haha, the controllable distance and traits of him looking alive will also be boosted. Allow my marionette to use my Beyonder powers? Doesn't this mean that I can use the powers of a faceless to make my marionette turn into another me? A perfect body double? This is a demigod of the seer pathway? This is one of the powers of a bizarro sorcerer? The enemy never knows if the one killed is the real bizarro sorcerer? Also, summoning a marionette from history. This is completely inconceivable. Thoughts surfaced in Klein's mind as he could hardly compose himself. The elder looked up and glanced at him before continuing. Give me a paper figurine. Klein frowned slightly and hesitated for a few seconds before taking out a paper figurine and handing it over. The elder reached out his wrinkled hand and took the paper figurine before swiping across it casually. Klein's headache, fever, and enlarged tonsils suddenly disappeared. The paper figurine was tainted with spots of red rust as it quickly cracked after becoming brittle. Using my paper figurine to transfer my ailment? Klein thought and finally asked, Sorry for my breach of etiquette. How may I address you? The elder didn't immediately reply as he said with a sigh, I can only provide you a little help. He paused as he gave a muffled laugh. You can call me, Zeratul. Chapter 839, Descendant of an Ancient God Fuck. At that instant, Klein, who heard the elder's reply, had vulgarities resound in his mind. Apart from that, no other thoughts appeared. Zeratul, the leader of the Secret Order, a descendant of the Fourth Epoch's Solomon Empire aristocracy, the former owner of the Antigonus family's notebook, and the Beyonder guide for Emperor Roselle. He was a true high-sequence Beyonder of the Seer pathway, a miracle invoker who was a secret existence about 2 centuries ago. He was believed by Rhodes to have lost control, turning from an angel into a monster during his attempt to advance to Sequence 1, Attendant of Mysteries. No matter which description was used, he was a heavyweight that the present Klein was unable to resist. He had the feeling of shock that a figure from history textbooks had jumped out of it and walked in front of him, alive. He also felt the air around him appear to congeal as they piled on top of him, crushing his body and stifling his breathing. Klein had once imagined that perhaps all his encounters, including his transmigration, had stemmed from Zeratil's setup, and he suspected that he would be akin to the final boss he would encounter in games. And now he had met him, ahead of time. I'm only a sequence 5. Klein couldn't help but shout out inwardly as he suspected if the person opposite him was the real Zeratil. Zeratil is a last name. It represents an aristocratic family in the 4th epoc's Solomon Empire. In theory, there should be many Zeratils over 2,000 years of history. Perhaps the one in Roselle's diary is the grandfather, father, brother, or son of that secret order's leader. Also, he mentioned that he has been dead for years, while Rhodes and Will Septon have testified that the secret order's leader, Zeratil, is still alive. He has just lost control and turned into a monster, turning extremely crazy. Klein tried to convince himself that the situation might not be as terrible as he imagined. This quickly calmed him down as he began to carefully contemplate. The beyonder powers that this Zeratil showcased doesn't seem like much, but all of them exceed the realm of normalcy. It's even more so for those that's related to history and fate. He's definitely not only a bizarro sorcerer. He might even be a sequence 3 or sequence 2. And this pathway's angels are few to begin with. This place is intricately tied with the nation of the Evernight, which disappeared from the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range. And it produces the ravings that reach the ears of low and mid-sequence beyonders of the seer pathway. Back then, the secret order's leader, Zeratil, had fewer appearances after he obtained the Antigonus family's notebook via Emperor Roselle. It's unknown what he was plotting. Does this mean that I can believe he had come to the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range to seek out the treasure left behind by the Antigonus family based on the notebook, and obtain the corresponding potion formula and ingredients of sequence 1 attendant of mysteries? In the world of mysticism, repeated coincidences usually imply problems and a confirmation. If it is that Zeratil, could it be that splitting himself to store himself inside the foggy town is the reason that caused his ultimate loss of control? As for being long dead, there's an even more reasonable explanation. The secret order leader Zeratil had said so himself. What is a miracle? A miracle is to be resurrected from the dead. And he was already a miracle invoker. As Klein's mind churned, the hoary elder who claimed to be Zeratil chuckled. From your reaction, you seem to know me? Klein quickly probed. I've heard of this last name. I once met Queen Mystic and learned of the secret order from her, and also know of its leader. The elder nodded gently without giving any confirmation or denial. He smiled and vaguely asked, "What other help do you need?" Help. Klein recalled the beyonder powers he had showcased and said after some hesitation, "Are you able to summon a fish from the outside world from this concealed world's history? It's okay if it has already been turned into food." From his point of view, it wasn't an impossibility. After all, most people that entered the town had come from Sonia Sea's easternmost front, the ruins of the Battle of Gods. Perhaps some fish that had been reared there had been brought in. They could be used to be stored as food, and also used to observe the changes in the environment. There could also be explorers who vanished from not being able to sleep in time when night came after eating their fill of fish. It wasn't unreasonable that fish meat could be found in the history of the foggy town. Zeratil raised his head and looked at Klein. He didn't immediately give him an answer. After a few seconds, he leveled his gaze and said indistinctly, "Yes." Just as he said that, a blob made up of ground fish meat appeared in Admiral of Bloodsignor's hands. It can only be maintained for 45 minutes. Once it's over, it's as though one has never eaten it before, Zeratil added. That actually worked. Klein increasingly found the high-sequence beyonder powers of the seer pathway to really be bizarre and terrifying. He had planned on saying that he didn't need any help, but considering how Zeratil was well known to be deceitful, with everything he said and did being questionable, he felt that he needed to make some preparations. Amidst his thoughts, Klein decided to appear a little greedy to lower Zeratil's appraisal of him, and believed that he could easily lead him to do his bidding. After letting his marionette put away the fish meat, his eyes rolled a little as he indiscernibly drew a breath and said, "I still need the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion formula." Zeratil didn't change his posture as he fell silent for a few seconds. He then said with a chuckle, "No problem. As long as you trust that I'll give you a real formula." After you return with the obsidian rock, I'll hand over both the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion formula and the symbol needed for opening the door to you. Sigh, that isn't something that I need to care about. All that matters is that you scatter my ashes back into the river in my hometown. After Klein listened in silence, he couldn't help but ask, you have a very high level. The ashes you leave behind will contaminate the river and create countless monsters. Zeratul laughed upon hearing that. Very meticulous. However, there's nothing special about my ashes. I've lost them long ago. As he spoke, he looked up again and glanced at the peak of the ancient cathedral. He's hinting that his Beyonder characteristics and body's specialness had been absorbed by the magnet above? Klein pondered over Zeratul's meaning as he pressed on matters regarding his Beyonder pathway. What's the sequence 3 potion name after Bizarro Sorcerer? Zeratul's beard moved slightly as he said, Scholar of Yore. Scholar of Yore. Although it sounds like a relic that's already dead and dug out from a tome, Zeratul has repeatedly mentioned history. The corresponding Beyonder powers are fascinating. Klein thought in glee as he asked again, then what's the corresponding sequence 0? Zeratul lifted his head again and glanced at him. Finally he chuckled and said, you will likely know when you open the door to escape. I hate people like you saying things midway, often just smiling without giving an answer. Klein immediately understood the feeling Emperor Roselle once had as he turned his gaze to the statue beside him and asked, who is this? Zeratul's head didn't turn as he said in a muffled manner, she is a descendant of an ancient god. A descendant of an ancient god? A descendant of annihilation demonic wolf Flegria? This ancient god seems to wield the authority of Evernight. His descendant established the nation of the Evernight? Before Klein could ask a question, he heard Zeratul chuckle and say, she also has a brother that you wouldn't be unfamiliar with. Who is it? Klein tried hard to recall who, but he couldn't find an answer. Zeratul chuckled. He gave himself a new last name. Antigonus. Antigonus. Nation of the Evernight. Hornacis. Flegria. Klein's eyes lit up slightly as he pieced together the fragmented pieces of information. It's very easy to understand the Church of Evernight destroying the nation of the Evernight, as it's a battle of authorities. However, to completely eradicate the Antigonus family for having inherited the seer Beyonder paths of the divine doesn't make sense. There's no need to go that far. After all, the pathways that can be interchanged with the sleepless pathway are the death and giant pathways. Furthermore, Klein was still puzzled to this day. Why would the Antigonus family place their treasure on the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range? Why did they trust the people of the nation of the Evernight that much? Now he finally understood something. Just as Klein was about to ask more questions, he suddenly saw the crimson moonlight shining in from the cathedral's windows brighten. It drew out shadows of the corpses hanging in midair. The crimson moon has turned clear. Klein's heart tightened. Without any additional thoughts, he followed his emergency plans by raising his right hand. Snapping his fingers, he lit a candle by the wall that was a distance away from him. At the same time, he got Senior to possess him as he leaped out, somersaulting in the process before arriving at the wall closest to the outside. And this time, the entire cathedral had turned abnormally silent. There were no longer any resounding ravings. Klein's spiritual intuition didn't give him any indication of danger, but he could tell from the shadows on the ground that the corpses hanging in midair had turned towards the flame. Without any hesitation, Klein pressed his left palm down, passing through a wall and arriving outside the cathedral. Then, without even daring to even raise his head, he borrowed the driving force of a wraith to tumble and run towards the nearest building. The distance from wall to wall was only about 10 meters. During this process, he didn't hear the beast-like growls nor detect the loitering figures. However, his back felt like it was being pierced by a sea of glares. In just a second, Klein had appeared outside the building. Pressing down with his palms, he passed through the wall. Then he snapped his fingers and remotely used flame controlling to ignite a candle inside the cathedral. After a brief moment of silence and anxiety, the feeling of being stared at vanished. Beyond the tightly drawn curtains, figures began to appear as they began loitering. Chapter 840. Using his advantage with all the abnormalities vanishing, Klein heaved a slight sigh of relief. He began to observe his surroundings. Then he selected a shadowy spot that wasn't too dark due to the faint moonlight. This was to prevent himself from suffering any sudden attacks. And the few seconds from before had made him come up with a theory about the faint figures and beast-like growls. They were previously corpses that were hung inside the cathedral, producing the ravings of Hornaces. Phlegria. When Klein passed through the wall and left the cathedral, the corpses that hung from above had turned to face the lit candle, and there weren't any figures on the street until Klein remotely used flame controlling and extinguished the flame. Everything was the same as before. When the crimson moon is clear and one's spirituality is enhanced, the magnet at the top of the cathedral will have a stronger influence on the foggy town. It will be able to control those corpses to loiter around and pretend that everything is normal? If that really is the case, the light might actually be attracting the controller's attention. Under such circumstances, if the flame isn't extinguished and the source is locked on, it might result in an extremely terrifying outcome. I can't rely on flame controlling to repeatedly divert the attention of those figures, Klein reminded himself. Then he turned to use his spirit body thread's vision that he didn't deactivate, to size up the bread, stewed beef potatoes and red wine on the dining table. He suspected that the food here was part of the magnet at the top of the cathedral. If it was consumed, one's spirit body threads would be corrupted, and it would cause them to be unable to resist floating towards the cathedral. This also explained why eating the food caused them to vanish. They ended up being hung up to dry in the cathedral, and be let out to walk, when the crimson moon turned clear. This matched Mr. A's description of the vanished people's reappearance under the bright moonlight. At a glance, Klein discovered that the food was like living beings. They had spirit body threads extending out, reaching towards the ancient cathedral. The most special point about them was that they had only one spirit body thread, obviously being different from the dense, countless spirit body threads of a normal living creature. Indeed, it's close to my theory. After obtaining some validation regarding his theory, Klein retracted his gaze and considered how to deal with Demoness of Despair Panatia. Beside him, Wraith Senior in his ancient triangular hat and dark red robe appeared. This marionette's bones cracked as his face squirmed. Soon he turned into Gehrman Sparrow. This was a marionette using the powers of a faceless. Klein observed his double for a moment and realized that there were some flaws. The clothes couldn't be changed, and if he concealed them with an illusion, it wasn't possible for him to fool a demigod-level Demoness of Despair. Even Mr. A might not fall for it. After some thought, he made Wraith Senior take off his clothes. As for himself, he took off the black clergyman robe, and they switched clothes with one another. While wearing the clothes and hat, Klein's expression turned odd. Over the past 2 months, the marionette had been wearing the same outfit. It had been down the sewers and experienced an explosion, so there were all sorts of smells mixed into the clothes. It wasn't a pleasant smell. Sigh, my present suffering is all a result of my laziness prior to this. Klein sighed silently as he completed changing his appearance. He had turned into Gehrman Sparrow dressed as a pirate captain. At this moment, Senior had also changed into the black clergyman robe. His aura was spirited and no longer cold. He looked no different from a living person. Klein deliberated for a moment, and took off Creeping Hunger, allowing Admiral of Blood to wear it on his left hand. This way, the marionette was the perfect copy of Gehrman Sparrow. One must go all the way when putting on an act. Besides, if Creeping Hunger were to revolt at this moment, then it will be eating the marionette. Haha, once the marionette lapses, will it feel cheated? It's like it ate a placebo. As Klein got Senior to get used to his state and take away the fish meat, he seriously began formulating plans. Relying on a marionette that can use my Beyonder powers wouldn't be able to defeat a Demoness of Despair. Even stealing the obsidian rock from her is nearly impossible. She's a genuine demigod after all. Even though this extremely convincing marionette gives me a chance of achieving success in battle, such as letting it draw her attention while I complete a sudden sneak attack and constantly swap positions, thus confusing Panatia so that she can't make an accurate judgment. I can't make up for the disadvantage that stems from the difference in our levels and strength to achieve my goals. I can consider using the marionette to engage in close combat and attempt to control Panatia's spirit body threads. He's already a corpse, so he wouldn't be affected by the plague. I can catch her by surprise using this method. But there are too many problems. First, the mysticism, viruses, and germs that a demoness of despair creates will grow in strength. At its peak, will it be able to affect a zombie? Second, does she still have other beyonder powers I'm not aware of? There's a high chance that it's the case. I'll first make a list and write down my advantages or things that are on par with the demoness of despair. Let's see if I can get any ideas. I can disguise myself. A marionette using its beyonder powers can be considered at the level of a demigod. Instantaneous swapping is also one. Apart from them, there isn't anything else. Yes, considering demoness of despair's current state, I seem to have something that I'm better at than her. She's in a half-crazed state. Her reason comes and goes at random, and she does extreme things. She's easily led around by her instincts. Although she's still good at incitement and allurement, that's an innate quality for catching prey. As for me, I'm in a normal state, and I haven't had any problems with my rationality yet. I'm still able to think and analyze. Don't tell me I need to come out on top using my wit? An idea came to Klein as he gradually formulated a new train of thought and plans. Why must I fight demoness of despair Panatia to the death at this moment? She definitely yearns to escape this foggy town. Deep down in her heart, this will be something that beats her instinctive need to eat. Furthermore, she's still full at the moment. I can try to cooperate with her. She can provide that obsidian rock, and I'll draw the special and secret symbol, putting together the conditions for opening the door. Besides, I'm not too sure about Zeratul. Who knows what schemes he might be up to? He might be secretly plotting something. By pulling a demoness of despair into this, it can effectively make the situation chaotic and restrain him in some way. Cooperation is a diplomatic choice, not a militaristic choice. The effects of an intact stand-in at the demigod level will definitely be better than directly engaging in battle. This is equivalent to me obtaining benefits from both sides. Klein rapidly made a decision. As he pondered on the details of him negotiating to cooperate, he patiently waited for the crimson moon to return behind the fog. After a while, the crimson moonlight that seeped through the dark-colored curtains dimmed. Klein immediately made his marionette pass through the wall and leave where he was hiding. Then, Senior walked onto the streets with the appearance of Gehrman Sparrow, walking straight towards the pitch-black cathedral. In about 10 seconds, Klein discovered that Senior was being affected by an ailment. To the dead, this was completely ineffective, but Klein could foresee that, with the passage of time, the ailment would worsen and turn stranger. It might even affect one's nerves and spirituality. This would make the zombie's actions turn stiff. In the end, even its knees would be unable to bend, making movement only being possible by hopping. Thankfully, I didn't choose to use the plan of letting my marionette control the spirit body threads. Klein immediately made Senior say out loud, "I was inside the cathedral for a while, and I'm not dead. I found a way to escape from this place." After saying that, Gehrman Sparrow sniffed as though his resistance to the ailment had weakened due to the declining state of his body. And at this moment, the white-robed Panatia suddenly appeared at the door of the cathedral. Her hair had been tied up once again, looking neat and tidy. Her slightly crazy-looking but beautiful eyes looked at Gehrman Sparrow as she took out a strangely profound obsidian rock. The contours of the obsidian rock was identical to the inset on the wall behind the cathedral statue. "You need it?" Panatia asked calmly. Klein discovered that the demoness of despair had dispelled her plague and ailment as he hurriedly made Senior nod. "Yes. As long as you place it in the correct location in the cathedral, and match it with a special symbol, we will be able to open a door that allows us to escape. I know that the cathedral's interior is very dangerous to you, but this is mainly a result of spirit body threads. And as a marionettist, I can control spirit body threads to prevent you from suffering the fate of being hung up." Panatia fell silent for a few seconds as she curled her lips. With a bright smile, she returned with a question. "Then I'll become your marionette? Or you can stop helping me at the critical moment, making me turn into a loitering figure under the moon?" Klein was long prepared. He immediately made his marionette reply earnestly, "What should I do to make you feel at ease?" Panatia didn't immediately reply. After some careful thought she said, "Give me your hair and flesh." Curses that demonesses are good at? Using Señor's hair and flesh to curse Gehrman Sparrow? Count me as the loser if that works. As Klein felt grounded, he made the marionette appear in a difficult position. "Then wouldn't you be able to kill me at any moment?" Panatia replied with a smile. "You can hand me the hair and flesh only when entering the cathedral. When inside, if there are any signs of me cursing you, you can give up controlling my spirit-body threads. It will be the same the other way round too. If anything abnormal happens to me, I'll immediately curse you. Once the door is opened, I'll leave first. And at the same time, I'll return the flesh and hair to you." Gehrman Sparrow hesitated for a long time as he discussed the details with the demoness of despair. Finally, he nodded and said, "All right, let's do it." Just as Panatia wanted to say something, her eyes suddenly narrowed as she slowly said, "For some reason, I'm still a little worried." Chapter 841. Keeping each other in check. What terrifying intuition. Despite not realizing that the Gehrman Sparrow in front of you is a double, you still feel that something is amiss. Hidden in a faraway building, Klein inwardly drew a gasp. His mind raced as he quickly came up with a corresponding strategy. He controlled Señor and made the marionette reply in a deep voice, "I'm also a little worried. After opening the door, if you leave first, you can ambush me from the outside once I'm out. You don't even need to ambush me. You can just wait outside. I believe that I should be the first to leave. And before that, you need to return to me my flesh and hair. When the time comes, you can be closer to the door. This way, you will have enough time to pass through the door before your spirit-body threads drift to the top of the cathedral." Panatia listened in silence and returned with a question. "Then how do I prevent you from destroying the door after you leave?" "This is also a problem for me," the marionette answered without giving any signs of weakness. "When I obtain that special symbol, I'll show it to you. That way, even if I close the door, you will still be able to open it again." Panatia closed her mouth as though she was thinking through the details, but she appeared somewhat irascible and could hardly compose herself. It was as though her inclination for insanity had filled her mind. After about 10 seconds she said again, "I think a pure curse might not be able to harm you. Seers do not lack the means to avoid harm, just like the paper figurine substitutes you used before. She really isn't leaving behind any loopholes. Thankfully, the person in front of you is a fake from top to bottom." As Klein lampooned, he made Señor take out one paper figurine after another. Then he burned them all in front of the demoness of despair. "I can't be sure that you haven't hidden one," Panatia said in suspicion, still somewhat neurotic. Gehrman Sparrow twitched the corners of his mouth in a deadpan manner and said, "You can try divination. Aren't witches good at that?" Panatia smiled impatiently and said, "The spirit world cannot be communicated with in here, and my spirituality—" She didn't finish her sentence as the look in her eyes turned somewhat dangerous. Klein knew what the demoness of despair was getting at. Her spirituality had been corrupted due to half a year of eating. It was somewhat chaotic and crazy, making it give unreliable answers, especially against a beyonder that was best at divination. The two reached a stalemate, momentarily unable to resolve the problem of trusting one another. At this moment, on the roof to the left, a hoarse and muffled voice sounded. "I can be your witness." Gehrman Sparrow and Panatia turned their heads at the same time and looked over. Mr. A's figure grew out from the shadows as he wore a blood-red hooded robe. "How will you bear witness?" Klein made Señor ask. Mr. A pulled down his hood and said with a deep chuckle, "I'll use flesh and blood magic to drill into your body and control your condition. Once you stop controlling the spirit body threads, or if you try to use paper figurine substitutes, I'll immediately give a warning or attempt to stop you. Once that door you speak of opens, I'll leave your body and pass through the door before my spirit body threads are affected." "Do you think Gehrman Sparrow is an idiot?" Klein made his marionette curl his lips. "Based on what I know, Rose bishops can hide in the bodies of others, but the host will immediately die once they leave. No, using that method is to evade investigations. Therefore, there's a need to fuse with the host's flesh and blood. But there's no need to do so in this situation. I'll silently wait inside your stomach, Mr. A explained in detail. No, it's not my stomach. It's in your stomach. Klein made Gehrman Sparrow take out a gold coin and pretend to attempt a divination. This crazy adventurer muttered under his breath as the gold coin in between his fingers was flipped. With a ping, the gold coin flew into the air and landed in his palm. Gehrman Sparrow carefully glanced at it. From the looks of it, you aren't lying. However, you will have to leave my body before I show the special symbol to Lady Despair. If this wasn't done, Gehrman Sparrow might end up being murdered by their collusion. After all, if Panatia obtained the door-opening symbol while wielding the obsidian rock, given enough time, she didn't need to worry about any anomalies with her spirit body threads. Then she wouldn't need help from Gehrman Sparrow at all. Mr. A's existence was only to prevent the use of paper figurine substitutes. However, Gehrman Sparrow didn't need to be too worried if Mr. A came out ahead of time. He wasn't even afraid that Panatia would lose decorum after knowing the door-opening symbol, because if that happened, he could rely on paper figurine substitutes to avoid certain death. On the other hand, Panatia wouldn't carry out a pursuit in the cathedral. This was because she would end up being hung up with the passage of time. Hence, she needed to seize the opportunity to escape immediately. Besides, there was no way to take the obsidian rock. Gehrman Sparrow would then have no chance of any subsequent escape attempts. Although the details of this plan were still flawed, it fully considered the situation of all three parties. Panatia raised her hand and grabbed at the hair that was sliding down her sideburns when she suddenly asked, "If I were to escape first, aren't you afraid that I'll ambush you?" This was also a problem that Gehrman Sparrow was previously worried about. Klein immediately made his marionette curl his lips and say, "I'm afraid. But I still have other means of escape. I'll take the risk." Panatia took 2 steps in an irritated manner before finally saying, "We shall do it as agreed then." After making up her mind, her smile became extremely relaxed. "You really are a special man, a man that made me see hope. After we leave, I don't mind letting you experience what extreme pleasure is if you aren't afraid." Gehrman Sparrow shifted his gaze away with great effort before looking at Mr. A. "I have no more questions." With the sound of howling wind, Mr. A flew down and landed not far from Gehrman Sparrow. His figure, along with his clothes, rapidly melted away, turning into a sticky glob of flesh and blood. Right on the heels of that, the flesh and blood piled onto one another and kept compressing into a tiny stream that had the thickness of an arm. Then it flowed towards Gehrman Sparrow. Far away in a building, Klein felt somewhat disgusted as he retched. Then he made Gehrman Sparrow open his mouth. The flesh and blood stream climbed up the marionette's body and drilled into its mouth. The slightly warm but slippery feeling passed through the gullet and entered the stomach. It's heavy. However, Mr. A's flesh and blood is helping to hold up the stomach, preventing it from sagging too much. Klein inspected the marionette and made him look up at the shrouded crimson moon and say to Panatia, "Let's begin." "All right." Panatia, who could hardly withstand her urges, impatiently walked towards the cathedral's entrance. Klein made Gehrman Sparrow follow by her side, and first plucked off his hair, before making 2 meat tendrils grow out from his arm before ripping it out. It made blood gush out. If someone very familiar with me were here, they would definitely notice a problem because I can't deal harm to my own body so decisively. Perhaps in the eyes of others, the crazy adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow, can probably do such a deed easily. As Klein noticed a problem and gained experience from his conclusion, he made the marionette pass through the ajar main door of the ancient cathedral. He then handed the hair and flesh to Panatia. Panatia slowed down her pace as she took out an ugly, palm-sized puppet and wiped the flesh over it, and tied the hair around its thin neck. She held the cursed puppet in one hand and finally stepped through the cathedral's door. Klein immediately got Gehrman Sparrow to control their spirit body threads. As for Mr. A, as he had overlapped with the marionette, it wasn't too much of a hassle. Even I can do it. With the powers showcased by Zeratul, He totally has the capability to help Beyonders that are not from the seer pathway to resolve the loss of control over spirit body threads in the cathedral. This way, as long as he wants the demoness of despair to enter, he could have opened the door a long time ago. Why didn't he do it? He is unable to communicate with others beyond the cathedral. That's why seer pathway Beyonders who aren't marionettists or higher can't walk to him? Klein used his marionette senses to analyze the situation remotely. And inside the cathedral, the corpses remained dangling in midair. Their heads were bowed, and their eyes were rolled back. From time to time, they would sway with the wind, producing the ravings Hornaces. Phlegria. When Panatia saw this scene, her body instantly stiffened, but she quickly composed herself. Together with Gehrman Sparrow, they walked under the gazes of the hanged. Before long, they saw the pitch-black altar and the statue of the ancient god's descendant. Zeratul remained sitting diagonally behind the statue, wearing a hood and sporting a white beard. When Gehrman Sparrow and Panatia approached, he slowly lifted his head and chuckled. Very good. Beyonders from the seer pathway need to know how to use their brain and not always think of fighting. He seemed to have foreseen that all of the paper figurines of Gehrman Sparrow would be destroyed. He directly reached out his wrinkled palm and grasped at something. His grab pulled out a yellowish-brown goatskin and a quill filled with ink and a bottle of ink. This made Panatia involuntarily twitch her brows. Zeratul picked up the quill and scribbled words and symbols before rolling it up and handing it to Gehrman Sparrow. That's the door-opening symbol, as well as the Bizarro Sorcerer potion formula you want. They can only last for 45 minutes and cannot be taken out. Klein avoided the demoness of despair and unfolded the goatskin, allowing the potion formula and the door-opening symbol to appear before his eyes. Suddenly, his pupils constricted and nearly froze. The door-opening symbol and the symbol provided by the Antigonus family's notebook, via the misfortune cloth puppet, were mostly the same. It was a vertical eye made up of many mysterious labels. However, there were tiny differences in the details. A crescent pattern had switched spots with a dotted line label. Chapter 842. Behind the door. At that instant, the first thought that surfaced in Klein's mind was, as expected, Zeratul has a ploy. Right on the heels of that, he was thankful that he had obtained the correct door-opening symbol from the Antigonus family's notebook ahead of time. With this newfound confidence, he didn't panic and become at a loss. Zeratul returned the quill and ink bottle to the past, and he lifted his head. Scanning Gehrman Sparrow and Panatia, he said with a sigh, "All the conditions are in place. You can now open the door." Upon saying that, he fixed his gaze on Gehrman Sparrow and chuckled. "Don't forget to take my urn with you." Just as he said that, his entire body suddenly crumbled into countless points of light and scattered into the surroundings, fusing into the void. It was as though he had long rotted and turned to dust. Left in the spot where he was sitting, there was a tin urn. Its surface had ancient patterns that didn't look anything special. Klein made Gehrman Sparrow take 2 steps forward, bend down and pick up the tin urn. He found it heavy, nothing like something that was fake. He used the hand holding the goatskin to open the lid, and saw that it was filled with grayish-white powder and particles. It didn't have a lustrous glow. It really is just ordinary ashes? Then who helped cremate Zeratul? He cremated himself? After Gehrman Sparrow closed the lid, he casually used this goatskin-wielding hand to take out a piece of flesh from a pocket and swallowed it. Panatia noticed this action as she squinted her eyes at him, as though she was asking what he was doing. Klein stuffed the fish into the marionette's mouth as he deliberately adjusted his breathing and said, "I'm a little nervous. I'm not sure if this door-opening symbol works." Panatia had already confirmed that he was eating ordinary fish meat. Although it looked somewhat disgusting, the half-crazy her had lacked the patience to make a further distinction. She moved her gaze away and looked at the urn and smiled. "If it's useless, we can share it. I'll have 1 scoop a day, and it will last a very long time." This demonist's mental state is really abnormal. Klein silently sighed. Passing by the eraser angel statue suspected to be the mother of the sky, Gehrman Sparrow came in front of the wall. Then, he turned his body to the side and pointed to the inset and said to Panatia, Place that obsidian rock inside. Panatia smiled gorgeously as she said with dull eyes, "Let me see the door opening symbol first. There's no need to be so wary of me. If I really wanted to harm you, I can immediately give up my marionette, and you wouldn't have the time to escape this cathedral. You'll definitely be hung up. When the time comes, I'll saunter in, pick up the obsidian rock, and open the door to leave." However, the symbol given by Zeratul is really problematic. It's best I find a person to bear the brunt of it. Klein's mind whirred as he made Gehrman Sparrow lift his palm and pat his abdomen while opening his mouth. A blob of indistinct flesh and blood surged out, piling up ahead and turning into the beautiful feminine Mr. A. Upon seeing this scene, Gehrman Sparrow flicked the goatskin and unrolled it. The special symbol was with the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion formula, as they were reflected in the eyes of Panatia and Mr. A. Panatia's eyes darted about before she smiled coquettishly and said, "Open the door. You leave first." She had confirmed that Gehrman Sparrow was still helping her control her spirit body threads, so there was plenty of time for her to wait. As she spoke, she threw the ugly puppet stained with blood and tied up hair at him. "She's also afraid of an accident." As Klein got Gehrman Sparrow to catch the puppet, he watched the demoness of despair take a few steps forward and insert the obsidian rock into the recess. The two fused together perfectly, not leaving any protrusions. The wall rapidly emitted light and gradually turned transparent. It could be seen that the outside was paved in stone slabs. There were walls with holes and clouds floating in midair. As Panatia took a step to the side, Gehrman Sparrow held the puppet goatskin, an urn in his left hand and reached out his right palm. He then used his finger as a pen and drew the vertical line made up of several secret symbols on the transparent wall. During this process, Klein was in a dilemma. He wasn't sure if he should draw Zeratul's symbol or the Antigonus family's one. Although he believed that Zeratul was problematic and had a scheme, he felt that he had belittled this powerful figure after calming down. If Zeratul's sole purpose was to harm him and everyone else with him, there was no need for him to mention the opening of the door. All he needed to do was wait patiently to achieve his goals. Furthermore, with the gray fog's aura completely severed and screened from Klein by the foggy town, he couldn't figure out why Zeratul would target him. Therefore, his final judgment was that Zeratul's goal was to coax someone into opening the door to allow him to obtain something or escape something. As for whether there was danger after the door opening, that wasn't within his considerations. If scattering the ashes was genuine and rather important, it was likely to be relatively safe after heading out. In short, danger was at every turn. That also meant that Zeratul's door opening symbol was real, and the probability that it didn't carry any danger was 50%. And on the other hand, the Antigonus family's notebook wasn't necessarily kind-hearted. The scene that Klein had seen from the divinations he did above the gray fog, and the information he obtained from Zeratul, and the fact that Zeratul had lost control and gone mad, he could basically determine that the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range's Antigonus family's treasure might very well be an enticing trap. Then, whether there was any latent risks in the complex picture provided by the notebook, that was something that needed consideration. On the one hand it's a tiger, and on the other hand it's a wolf. It's the ultimate choice of the lesser evil. Also, the Antigonus family's symbol is for entering the treasure trove. It doesn't mean that it can be used to leave. As Klein contemplated, he didn't stop drawing while he quickly approached the part which was different. At this moment, he stole a glance at Panatia, and discovered that her eyes had a glint in them as she wore a smile. It felt like she had the urge to try. If she's normal, as a senior instigator, she should be able to control her expressions. Besides, she just saw the door opening symbol as well. Klein's heart stirred as he let the marionette draw the symbol provided by Zeratul. Soon, the complicated vertical eye was drawn. Pure light enveloped the area as they traversed the patterns and finally gathered together. Amidst a spectacular blast of light, an illusory, double door filled with secrecy appeared on the wall. Due to the push from Gehrman Sparrow, it slowly opened. Behind the door was the ancient stone tiles and hole-ridden walls they had previously seen. Everything was very silent, and there were zero abnormalities. At this moment, Panatia's figure suddenly shattered, turning into mirror fragments. At the same time, the lady in a pure white robe appeared in front of Gehrman Sparrow and passed through the door, and in her hand, there was an additional ugly puppet stained with blood, its neck coiled with a strand of hair. As for the one in Gehrman Sparrow's hand, it had degenerated into a piece of glass. In terms of magical illusions, a Demoness of Despair was several times superior to Klein. After Panatia passed through the door first, she half turned around and faced Gehrman Sparrow, revealing a crazy and teasing smile. Black flames soared from her palm as she ignited the puppet. At that moment, it was as though she was saying, "Despair. Plunge into the deepest pit of despair just as hope arrives." Only then did Klein realize that the curse couldn't be diverted or weathered by paper figurine substitutes. Panatia immediately turned around, preparing to depart from the foggy town and the ancient cathedral, afraid that an accident would happen. At that moment, her eyes suddenly froze. Her body crumbled, transforming into one mirror after another. However, she wasn't able to put a distance further than 10 meters between her and the door. In just a second or two, Panatia let out a sharp cry as invisible threads and thick, black hair curled around her, binding her within. Her exterior was covered in black flames as she froze into layers of ice. Suddenly all of this disintegrated. Demoness of Despair. Panatia's eyes effused clear, deep despair and regret. Her expression rapidly turned stiff as her neck seemed to be held up by an invisible hand. Her entire body rose into the air and hung there, her eyes rolling back bit by bit, but her looks remained immaculate. On the side of the door, Gehrman Sparrow's body had been enveloped in black flames and began melting like wax. As for Mr. A, who had planned on flying through the door, he began retching, vomiting one fresh mushroom after another. His body began to sprout mushrooms as if a drizzle had just passed. Before Gehrman Sparrow lost his vision, the scene behind the door pulled close, presenting an empty foyer. No, it wasn't empty. Hanging in midair were even more corpses. They were of all ages and sexes. Some were dressed exquisitely, others gorgeously, ancient, or casually. These corpses were like the ones hanging in the cathedral. They all floated up as they came, and went as though they were acting in a grand musical, accurately reflecting a musical of the daily lives and details a town should have. Klein saw that, behind these hanged corpses, there was a transparent and slimy tentacle. It was covered in complex patterns with secrecy hidden within. It was as though it could drive anyone crazy. Countless tentacles extended deep into the foyer, and there sat an ancient, huge stone chair. Its surface was inlaid with dull gold and gems. Klein tensed up as he didn't hesitate to close his eyes and cut his connection with the marionette. In his mind, the scene that he had seen from his previous divination surfaced. Seated on the huge chair were countless translucent maggots that clustered together. They squirmed slowly as they grew freely, extending out nearly invisible tentacles. And the final scene that was embedded in the marionette's vision was at the bottom of the ancient chair. A tarot card sat there silently. Its surface was also that of Roselle. The emperor was wearing a gorgeous head accessory and colorful clothes. It held a stick with luggage hanging from it as though he was on a long trip. He had a visionary look, and beside him was a puppy. At the corner were shiny words. Sequence 0, the Fool. Chapter 843. Magical Mushroom. Sequence 0, the Fool. After discerning the words on the tarot card, Klein once again felt the same feeling he had when he heard Zeratul say his name. At that moment, he felt the strong call of destiny. He felt that everything had been arranged from the beginning, just like 0-08. He began to suspect that his original judgment, believing that the female beast tamer from the traveling circus that had visited Tingen and performed a tarot divination for him wasn't an ordinary person. As his thoughts raced, Klein viewed it from another angle and came up with a new idea. Gradually, he stopped being that horrified, fearful, and depressed. Perhaps it wasn't a machination, but the changes that I brought about myself. This is because of the ritual that resulted in my transmigration. I had a connection with the mysterious space above the gray fog. Fate would naturally be affected as a result. More precisely, as a visitor from another world. I never had my fate here. The current trajectory I've taken is a result of my character, the encounters of the original Klein, the influence of the gray fog, and the surrounding environment. The mysterious space above the gray fog is clearly strongly tied to the seer pathway. And this pathway's sequence 0 is the Fool. When projected into reality, and in front of a divination, I'll definitely get the Fool as my card. Similarly, this resulted in me later using the Fool as my name. Klein's mood calmed down bit by bit, believing that this was the most plausible explanation. Using Occam's razor to eliminate all presently unknown factors, I can still obtain a reasonable explanation. That means that it's quite likely to be the case. Klein forced himself to stop thinking about questions he couldn't provide certain answers to. He then turned his attention to what had just happened. That huge chair and that cluster of translucent maggots were what I saw when I made a divination above the gray fog. From carefully considering and inferring things from this harrowing scene, it might very well be an angel from the seer pathway, an angel that had lost control and turned into a monster. Zeratul himself? Or the powerful entity from the Antigonus family from the 4th epoch? If it's the former, that corroborates with the Rhodes and Willa Septon. Zeratul is already sequence 1 and has lost control and gone mad. He broke down into a monster. This matches. This can also explain why Zeratul only wishes for the door to be opened. It's because once the door of secrets is opened, the two sides will have a connection, allowing him to recover from his present state bit by bit. His repeated emphasis on his ashes was just a pretense. But herein lies the problem. The environment Zeratul is located in, as presented by a Rhodes, doesn't resemble the ancient palace at the mountain peak. Otherwise, I would have recognized it back then. What if that's the angel from the Antigonus family who's living as an abject existence, one that made Zeratul suffer after he came to the Hornacis mountain range after obtaining the notebook from Roselle? He had a part of him separated from him without realizing it, thus causing him to go mad during the advancement. Regardless, he is a sequence 1 attendant of mysteries. After all, Zeratul was already a miracle invoker back then. From this angle, Zeratul's goal might very well be the opening of the door, allowing the foggy town's history and fate to become mixed with the outside world, preventing him from being dissociated again. Regardless, that cluster of translucent maggots is probably a sequence 1 that lost control. No wonder the demoness of despair faced a breakdown the moment she saw him. She only managed to struggle a little before being hung up, turning into a marionette that's being hung up to dry. Thankfully, I was lacking in clues back then, and the scenes I saw through divination wasn't clear enough. Otherwise, I would have suffered a terrible blow from witnessing a complete and crazy mythical creature. I would have lost control and mutated. Wait, no matter how strong he is, can he be stronger than the eternal blazing sun and the true creator? Even if a seer pathway beyonder has a certain resistance against the mysterious space above the gray fog, it would at best make them be at the same level. In other words, as long as I endured the pain, with the prerequisites met, I have one chance of prying on its secrets, and a complete mythical creature's state is mixed in with the relevant knowledge. Who knows, I might be able to get 1 or 2 high-sequence formulas, just like how I obtained the Unshadowed from the eternal blazing sun back then. At this thought, Klein couldn't help but have a scene surface in his mind. The Fool above the gray fog was silently reaching out his thieving hands once again. While reeling in joy, Klein also found it a great pity because, with his present level, strength and items, he had no way to head to the ancient chair with the translucent maggots and pick up the Fool card. To see an item that one desired the most, but not being able to obtain it was often painful. Phew. At least I've already obtained the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion formula. In the future, I still have one's chance of prying on its secrets. The risk I took this time wasn't in vain. All the gold pounds I spent and the marionette I lost wasn't in vain either. Zeratul likely wouldn't give a fake formula. To him, there's no need for him to lie to a sequence 5 beyonder, who might not walk out alive. Besides, if he was lying, he had to be wary of me already knowing the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion formula. The reason why I asked might only be to determine if he was worth trusting. I'll divine this later when I'm back above the gray fog. Klein heaved a sigh of relief, and seeing that there hadn't been any anomalies outside for quite a while, he decided to immediately approach the pitch-black cathedral and observe the changes inside. To him, all the problems that he thought about weren't pressing issues. The pressing issue was to leave the secret world, to leave this foggy town. When he came out of the building he was in, Klein, who was wearing an ancient triangular hat and dark red coat, carefully came to the entrance of the ancient cathedral. He carefully passed through the ajar door and walked in. The corpses that looked and dressed differently were no different from before. They remained hanging in midair, swaying with the wind and producing the ravings of Hornaces. Phlegria. Klein walked under them as his eyes got accustomed to the dim environment, allowing him to see more. The half-demonic wolf and half-human statue was still standing there without any signs of damage. The obsidian rock and the tin urn were behind the statue without any signs of cracking. Klein first heaved a sigh of relief as he began to observe his surroundings when his gaze froze. In a dark corner stood a gigantic mushroom taller than he was. The mushroom's cap had scarlet red like blood with interspersed white patterns. Its body was formed out of similar tiny mushrooms. Their patterns drew out a face, Mr. A's face. However, Mr. A's eyes were blank. It didn't have the glint that one would call human. There were mushrooms growing from both sides of the stem, forming into long arms. And on the left palm was a thin human skin glove. Both parties had seemed to fuse as one. What kind of abomination is that? Klein involuntarily took a step back. He found his knowledge in mysticism completely lacking at that moment in time. He began taking actions to protect himself. While doing so, having not deactivated his corresponding visions, he discovered that the terrifying mushroom didn't have any spirit body threads. It appeared to have long been dead, and its only movements were the results of spasming nerves. Suddenly, Klein had a theory. Mr. A, who had been infested with mushrooms, didn't manage to escape in time and had seen the cluster of translucent maggots. He had seen a complete mythical creature, causing his mind to instantly die as his body collapsed completely. This also resulted in a terrifying mutation. It then merged with Senor, who had disintegrated from the curse, becoming a never-seen-before mushroom monster. Also, creeping hunger has been swallowed. This mushroom is really disgusting. I'll throw Frank into the sea if he ever mentions mushrooms again. Klein's eyes darted around slightly as he subconsciously headed for the obsidian rock. He planned on ignoring the mushroom and first escape. At this moment, he found his mind turning adrift. Everything around him seemed to turn into a blur. Suddenly, Klein realized that he was being forcefully pulled into a dream. He immediately escaped the dream and saw the nearly 2-meter-tall mushroom sliding over slowly. In its hand was a great sword that was a combination of scarlet magma and blue-hot flames. It can use sword of lava. Klein didn't hesitate as he opened his mouth and let out a sound. Bang! The extremely penetrative air bullet hit the mushroom, who had slowed down due to it being engaged in controlling dreams. The bullet drilled through its cap, tearing open a huge wound. Underneath the wound was human flesh and tiny spores. They quickly squirmed and restored the body. To think that's possible. Klein felt a strong sense of danger as he hurriedly lunged to the side, rolling several times in the process. The mushroom sped up suddenly as the sword of lava in its hand dragged scarlet and blue flames, cleaving down at the spot Klein had been standing at. It caused the floor tiles to rupture as flames scattered. At this moment, Klein snapped his fingers, igniting the tiny mushrooms that formed the monster. Then he ran towards the back of the statue in an attempt to obtain the obsidian rock. But finding his thoughts go adrift for a moment, Klein realized that he was going in the wrong direction. He was rushing towards the entrance. It can distort my will? Klein's heart tightened as he noticed through the corner of his eye that the surface of the gigantic mushroom was covered in a layer of frost. The frost had extinguished the soaring scarlet flames. As his thoughts raced, Klein ran towards the door and snapped his fingers, igniting the tree leaves outside. In situations with zero understanding about his enemy, and him having not made any preparations, he believed that a magician had to choose to retreat and avoid dangers for the time being. More importantly, his strongest marionettist powers were useless because the gigantic mushroom didn't have any spirit body threads. Scarlet flames soared up like water, enveloping Klein's body. He quickly appeared in the flames outside as he jumped towards the ground. He was just about to distance himself when he heard a howling wind. The red-capped mushroom had come out of the cathedral with the auspices of a strong gust of wind. It can even fly. Klein snapped his fingers, using flaming jump to open up a gap. Meanwhile, he discovered his nose was itching as he wanted to sneeze. I'm also sick. How am I supposed to fight? I don't have any mystical items, and I haven't been able to fully express my strengths as a marionettist. It really is a magical mushroom. Klein was at a loss on whether to laugh or cry when he hid inside a building. Suddenly, he felt his body become somewhat cold as his mind naturally reflected his present appearance. His ancient triangular hat, dark red coat, white pants and black boots had vanished. All he had on him was a pair of briefs to uphold his last bit of dignity. 30 minutes are up. The spell for summoning Seigneur from the past has ended. Klein instantly understood the reason as he began thinking. That mushroom, which fused with parts of Admiral of Blood, has likely disappeared as well. Also, in another 15 minutes, the effects of the fish will disappear. It will lack the main element that forms it. Klein couldn't help but curl his lips. He immediately used flames and leaped out. Indeed, as he expected, the gigantic mushroom had a ridiculous hole in part of its stem. Furthermore, it couldn't fix it, causing its speed to slow and become impeded. Come on, let's play hide and seek, Klein silently said as he began circling the town streets, using the flames and buildings to engage in a merry chase with the gigantic mushroom. During this process, the crimson moon didn't turn clear at all. After more than 10 minutes, the terrifying mushroom finally lost its ability to move as it collapsed on the street. Klein heaved a sigh of relief as he slowly and carefully approached. He saw that the flesh and blood of the mushroom was gathering together as points of light converged. Soon, all that was left was a thin human skin glove. This, because of the mutation brought about by the sequence 1 Angel, Creeping Hunger fused with Mr. A? It's an upgraded version of Creeping Hunger? Klein bent his back as he carefully picked up the human skin glove. Chapter 844. Which symbol? The thin human skin glove didn't look any different from the past, but Klein didn't dare to be too careless. He used divination to make a crude inspection. Apart from the 5 fingers, the palm and the back of the palm can each graze one more soul. Currently, all 7 spots are filled. It has signs of similar Beyonder characteristics fusing together. It also seems to have the powers of flesh and blood magic. The speed of switching souls has sped up significantly. It has to eat a person a day, or else it will eat its owner. Creeping Hunger, you are swelling in self-importance again. You need to reflect on yourself above the gray fog later. I'm temporarily unable to obtain any revelations for the rest. After I leave this place, I'll head above the gray fog to make a more accurate divination. Yes, I'm still not sure if there are any other side effects. All I know is that it wouldn't cause me any harm for the time being. Also, Mr. X who was grazed wasn't affected. Travelers traveling and door opening still work. Klein heaved a sigh of relief as he wore the upgraded Creeping Hunger. Then he rushed for the cathedral, hoping to leave as soon as possible. During his merry chase with the gigantic mushroom, he hadn't forgotten to cast an illusion on himself to make him wear a trench coat and a top hat. As for the Beyonder characteristic that Seigneur left behind, Klein suspected that it was likely in the hands of Demoness of Despair Panatia. And this demigod was being hung inside the ancient palace, under the watch of the cluster of maggots. Flesh can be slowly eaten to be stored for the future, but Beyonder characteristics will definitely have appeared and taken form after this much time. Even if Demoness of Despair didn't care too much about it and threw it somewhere, in this place that isn't connected to the spirit world and highly restricts divination, I'm unable to quickly locate it. And in this sort of environment, who knows what sorts of anomalies will happen next? Who knows if that obsidian rock will automatically teleport and disappear? Thus, I need to make every second count and escape as quickly as possible. Klein returned to the cathedral with a clear line of thought. Although he had promised Miss Sharon to sell Seigneur's Beyonder characteristic to Merrick, the ingredient itself was corrupted to begin with, making it difficult to use for the concocting of a potion. Secondly, his safety was a lot more important. It's not like it cannot be resolved. I can just hunt another wraith or find Willa Septon's help to shatter the Beyonder characteristic in Merrick's hands and allow it to be purified. This will have to wait until a particular infant is born. Klein mumbled silently as he passed through the swaying corpses and came to the side of the stone statue. Along the way, he found the iron cigar case which he had used to put the marionette in. It hadn't been devoured by the mushroom. Azek's copper whistle and the lone gold coin inside weren't damaged either. Putting these items away, Klein controlled his spirit body threads to prevent himself from floating to the top of the cathedral as he bent down to pick up the obsidian rock. After confirming that the important item wasn't damaged, he felt a lot calmer. He then inspected Zeratl's tin urn. When he opened the lid and took a careful look, Klein's pupils constricted as his gaze instantly froze. All the ashes inside were gone. There wasn't any left inside. Zeratl achieved his goal? Should I say as expected? Klein threw away the thin urn while feeling doubtful. He stood up straight and inserted the obsidian rock into the wall at the back. The wall emitted light again as it turned transparent, allowing people to see the ancient stone slabs outside, the hold walls, and the floating clouds. At the thought of the cluster of terrifying maggots, Klein wasn't in a rush to draw the symbol provided by the Antigonus family's notebook. He first raised his right hand and snapped his fingers. He had ignited a tree outside the cathedral, in preparation to escape with flaming jump the moment something wasn't right. After making his preparations, Klein used his finger and quickly outlined the vertical eye formed of many secret symbols. Compared to the previous one, a crescent and dotted line had swapped places. With his final stroke, the pure beams of light bloomed as they followed the vertical eye's patterns before blasting into a radiant light. The entire cathedral turned ethereal as it shook. Klein felt as though he had instantly arrived at the top where the corpses were being hung. In front of him was a pair of illusory double doors. Behind the door was a familiar ancient palace. It was where Panatia and the other corpses were gently swaying. Translucent tentacles with strange and mysterious patterns swarmed over and slammed on the door, but were unable to open it. All it could do was use some of its strength to grab Klein's spirit body threads. Klein didn't hesitate to snap his fingers. While pulling at his spirit body threads, he leaped to the flames outside the cathedral. Right on the heels of that, he snapped his fingers repeatedly and flashed away, escaping to the farthest point of the foggy town. After the ethereal feeling of the pitch-black cathedral vanished, Klein paused and frowned. That also leads to the palace with the rampaging angel. The symbol provided by the Antigonus family's notebook is as much of a trap as Zeratl's was. However, this symbol only seems capable of triggering the door to escape, but it's unable to open it. Otherwise, I might not have been able to escape. It's the symbol for entry, while Zeratl's one was for exiting. What should I do? How do I leave? Klein subconsciously surveyed the ghastly silent town which was shrouded in fog, and he forced himself to calm down. He began to think about how he could escape. Perhaps that's not the only wall that allows me to leave, but it's unlikely. All these years, there have been batches of people coming to the foggy town. If there are any clues outside the cathedral, they should have long found it. Try another symbol? What should I try? Klein fell into deep thought as he analyzed the intricacies to see if he could be inspired. This place is related to the nation of the Evernight and the Antigonus family. As for the monster on the huge throne in the ancient palace, it's definitely a rampaging angel from the seer pathway, regardless of his identity. Zeratl, who's also involved in this matter, is similarly an angel of the seer pathway. The Antigonus family's notebook, which provided the symbol, is also directly tied to this pathway. Therefore, the correct door-opening symbol is likely related to the seer pathway. Sequence 0 of the seer pathway is likely called the Fool. This can be initially confirmed. Otherwise, that owner of the card of blasphemy wouldn't have been lured to the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range and become a hanger. The Fool. The Fool. As he ruminated over the word, Klein suddenly thought of himself. He thought of the mysterious symbol behind his high-back chair that represented himself above the gray fog. Perhaps I can give it a try? Klein pondered for a few seconds before deciding to make a bold attempt. After all, he was temporarily out of ideas. He returned to the spired cathedral, and under the gaze of the hanged corpses, he walked to the wall behind the statue and picked up the obsidian rock that had fallen once again. After the obsidian rock was inserted, the door rapidly turned transparent. As Klein snapped his fingers to light another tree, he took a deep breath. He drew the fool's symbol that was made up of the pupilless eye and the partially contorted lines. Soon he completed the symbol as he found himself feeling anxious. But this time nothing happened to the transparent door. It doesn't work. Klein's expression turned wry as he suspected that he would be trapped in there, engaging in murderous battles with beyonders who later entered, doing so until he starved to death or was eaten. He shook his head to dispel his emotions of despair. He began running through ideas in search of other clues. This place is related to the nation of the Evernight, and is related to the Antigonus family, and they were obliterated by the Church of Evernight. The one who sent me here is the Eraser Angel who's suspected to be the Mother of the Sky. She was active in the basement of the Church of Evernight's St. Samuel Cathedral. The reason why people vanish if they don't sleep at night in the ruins of the Battle of Gods is said to be a result of the remnant aura and strength of a deity from the Evernight domain. Therefore, this is clearly related to the Evernight's authority or even the Evernight goddess. Areas related to the goddess. The more Klein thought about it, the more he lacked confidence. He was originally analyzing the problem from an objective angle, but he had unknowingly changed the way he addressed the Evernight goddess. And this led him to a new idea. Perhaps I can try the label corresponding to the dark sacred emblem, or the symbol that represents the goddess in mysticism. Out of options, Klein exhaled and raised his right hand again, drawing the simplified picture of the dark sacred emblem. Suddenly, the watery scene behind the transparent door shook as a change occurred. Although he could still see the ancient palace and the hole-ridden wall, they were very far away and could only be faintly made out. Behind the door was a bottomless cliff with jagged rocks. It was amidst the clouds in the sky with stars and the crimson moon that hadn't been concealed by the sunlight. It was like some part of a mountaintop. It really works. Klein stared at this scene with a dumbfounded expression as he subconsciously reached out with his palms and pushed the door open. There was a cold breeze outside that produced a howl. Klein was just about to take a step out when he fell into thought and paused. Then he flipped a gold coin and did a divination. He received a revelation that there was no danger outside. Following that, he drew a crimson moon on his chest in a feigned manner. After doing this, Klein stepped out with his right foot and passed through the illusory door. His vision went dark as he saw an endless night and resplendent stars. Following that, he found himself on a mountaintop. Apart from the unmelted snow, jagged rocks, and morning sunlight, there was nothing. I'm out. I'm safe. Klein didn't observe his surroundings as he directly used creeping hunger to turn transparent as he attempted using traveling. If this succeeded, it would mean that he had escaped the foggy town and returned to the real world. He could then leave the location he was at to avoid any danger. If he were to fail, he would quickly take note of the situation and be wary of any sudden attacks. After a moment, Klein's body turned faint as he vanished from the spot. The colors in front of him saturated as countless, indescribable shadows appeared. He had succeeded in entering the spirit world. Chapter 845. Return. It really is the spirit world. Klein was delighted as he inwardly muttered to himself. Without needing further confirmation, his spirituality and spiritual perception had told him that this was the real spirit world. And this meant that he had returned to the real world, the place with all kinds of delicacies. I nearly cried tears of joy. Klein inwardly made a self-deprecating comment as he considered where he was supposed to head to next. From the position of the stars, moon, and sun, it's still morning. If there's no time difference between the real world and the foggy town, it's at most 7:30 a.m. Or maybe earlier. At this point, the servants must have discovered the disappearance of their mate, and they would definitely inform the priests and bishops, even if they have received the corresponding training, and would report to their superiors according to the protocol. They will have to first eliminate the possibility that someone was skiving away or having a stomachache. They would need more than 10 minutes before confirming this and begin taking the necessary actions. And after the report to their superiors, the priests and bishops wouldn't be able to instantly tell the severity of the matter. They would only believe that the servant had escaped, and they wouldn't quickly connect this matter to the keepers. After they do a divination or investigation to figure out the truth, it would be 20 to 30 minutes later. That also means that they likely haven't begun their search in the surrounding area to find the intruder. The identity of Dwayne Dantes hasn't been exposed yet. If the Bizarro Sorcerer potion formula given by Zeradol is real, then the identity of Dwayne Dantes still has many uses. If I can still keep the identity going, I should try harder to not abandon it. Besides, the only things that I'm wearing which are real are my glove and underwear. If I head elsewhere, I'll be a pervert. Klein already had a choice he was leaning towards. He took out the iron cigar case, which appeared to be inside his pocket, but was actually lodged under a rubber band. He opened it and took out the gold coin inside. Returning to 160 Buckland Street is dangerous, Klein muttered 7 times, and with a flick he saw it slowly spin in the spirit world, wobbling up and down, left and right, before landing on his palm. This time, it was tails, indicating a negative response. Klein nodded indiscernibly and immediately traveled towards Backlund. After 3 stops, his figure finally appeared in his room at 160 Buckland Street. The curtains were drawn tightly and it was dim. It was very suitable for sleeping. And on the bed, Dwayne Dantes was lying on the bed facing up. His hands were grabbing the ends of the blanket near his neck. From the looks of it, the investigation hasn't reached me. This appearance is ridiculous. Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief and saw Dwayne Dantes dissipate and turn into a palm-sized mirror. Water ripples appeared on the mirror's surface as silver light bloomed and turned into Loanese text. Exalted Great Master, did you encounter something? Your loyal and humble servant, Erodes, failed to sense you before. It wasn't anything important, Klein answered perfunctorily. This made him confirm that Erodes was unable to pry into the secrets that happened in the foggy town. After all, this fellow was able to present the environment where the rampaging Zeratul was. It really is related to the authorities of a deity? Klein's mind stirred as he asked. Did anyone look for me? No, no one came to disturb you. The silver on the mirror's surface changed and produced new words. Klein felt truly relieved as he said to Erodes, You may leave. I'll summon you again if needed. All right, Master. Goodbye, Master. Like before, Erodes produced a drawing of a hand waving on the mirror. After the aqueous light vanished, the mirror was restored to normal. Klein walked to the bedside and pulled out the pajamas underneath and wore it. Then, he took out candles and other items before entering the bathroom. He set up a sacrificial ritual, preparing to send creeping hunger, Azek's copper whistle, the iron cigar case, and the various mysticism materials above the gray fog to avoid any investigations he might face. After doing all of this, Klein didn't delay and sat at the fool's seat. He conjured the Bizarro Sorcerer's potion formula in front of him. Sequence 4 Bizarro Sorcerer. Main ingredient: Bizarro Bane's main eye, the true soul body of a spirit world plunderer. Supplementary ingredients: 200 milliliters of a Bizarro Bane's blood, 30 grams of a spirit world plunderer, 10 grams of red hair birch bark, 1 segment of golden grapevines, fingernail-sized self-made rubber mask. Advancement ritual. Relying on one's strength and strategy, orchestrate a grand performance before many spectators to kill a beyonder creature at the level of a demigod. Then, at the end of the performance, consume the potion. Klein didn't consider what this ritual actually meant. Beneath the potion formula, he wrote a corresponding statement. Following that, he summoned a spirit pendulum from the junk pile. Holding it in his left hand, he began a divination. Before long, Klein opened his eyes and saw the dangling topaz rotating clockwise. This meant that the Bizarro Sorcerer potion formula he had was genuine. Phew. Klein exhaled as he took the opportunity to determine what kind of changes creeping hunger had experienced, as well as what the various negative side effects were. After a dream divination and several direct attempts, he figured out the exact situation in less than 2 minutes. Creeping hunger could now graze 7 souls. During each grazing process, it could obtain 2 or 3 Beyonder powers. One of them can be chosen by the wearer. There are currently 8 souls inside Creeping Hunger. The others completely dissipated from the mutation brought about by the Attendant of Mysteries. And due to the excessive number of souls, it caused a congestion, making some of the powers unusable. 1 soul needs to be released to restore it back to normal. At present, the first of the 8 souls is Baron of Corruption, which is Wormtongue Mither. He fused with the Beyonder characteristics of the same pathway that Mr. A had grazed. Apart from distortion and bribe, weaken, there's another area of effect Beyonder power called corrosion. It can turn the hearts of people within 10 meters dark and greedy, making them make irrational choices. The second is Desire Apostle Curtius. He fused with Mr. A's Devil and replaced Danger Premonition, which requires advanced activation before being useful, with Sulfur Fireball. And Language of Foulness, Slow and Sword of Lava have been enhanced. Third is Traveler Mr. X Louis Veen. He fused with Mr. A's Scribe. While keeping traveling and door opening, it has obtained the Beyonder power of Record. However, there's a change. It's unable to record ordinary Beyonder powers, and it can only be used against targets at the demigod level. The chance of success has been increased. Although it's still very troublesome, 8 times or so would be needed as long as I'm not too unlucky. In addition, it cannot record more than 2 demigod-level Beyonder powers, and cannot exceed sequence 3. Fourth is Zombie Mavati. There hasn't been any change. It's still the original zombie strength, ice control and zombie manipulation. Fifth is an unknown Demoness of Affliction. She can give the user a rather powerful sense of charm. In addition, one's appearance would receive an adjustment to a certain degree. In addition, she can provide an ailment that covers 50 meters. Creatures within that range will slowly be infected, and the effects slowly become severe. In the beginning, it might be oversensitive skin, a cold, or a fever. But 20 to 30 seconds later, it might very well turn into serious illnesses like pneumonia. After 2 or 3 minutes, one can suddenly suffer cardiac arrest or a brain aneurysm. Sixth is an unknown Wind Blessed. There are 3 Beyonder powers: short distance flight, dive, and water control. Seventh is an unknown Soul Assurer with the 2 Beyonder powers of forcefully pulling one into a dream and causing a spirit body to sleep. Eighth is an unknown Doctor with the 3 Beyonder powers of distinguishing the time, treatment of serious ailments, and stitching souls. At the same time, Creeping Hunger itself has Shadow Lurking and Flesh Bomb. Furthermore, it has the chance and strength to barely graze a sequence 4 saint. It has instantly become so much stronger. As Klein was secretly delighted, he also frowned at the negative side effects. Now Creeping Hunger had to eat a living person every day, otherwise it would devour the wearer. At the same time, it would praise the true creator from time to time in the wearer's mind. It would bring about chaotic thoughts and a headache. Apart from those 2, it was also still afraid of mushrooms. No powers could be used if mushrooms appeared within 5 meters of it. To randomly praise the true creator is really troublesome. Same for eating a living person every day. I'll first throw it above the gray fog, and let it calm down for a few days. Perhaps there might be some changes. If that really doesn't work, I can only write to Mr. Azik. Klein quickly made up his mind, and didn't hesitate to release the Soul Assurer's soul. He also planned on swapping the Wind Blessed and Doctor later. The Demoness of Affliction depended on the circumstances. To the side of the bronze table, the Soul Assurer's spirit surfaced. But due to the mutation, it couldn't be maintained once it lost its host. It rapidly dissipated. His Beyonder characteristic was produced. It was entirely black in color. At its core was pure shimmering light that looked like a night sky with embedded stars. After doing this, Klein didn't hesitate to throw Creeping Hunger and the other items into the junk pile. He then quickly returned to the real world, ended the ceremony, and cleared up any traces. Following that, he washed his face and brushed his teeth to make Dwayne Dantes look sharp. After leaving the bathroom, Klein in his pajamas walked to the door with his usual expression. He pulled open the door and said to his valet outside, "Prepare a set of clothes that's suitable for home wear." "Yes, sir." Richardson didn't ask why as he immediately walked to the wardrobe. Only at this point, with him seeing his servants back, did Klein confirm that he was out of harm's way and had returned back to his normal life. Chapter 846. Find the target. St. Samuel Cathedral, behind Cheney's Gate. Backlund Archbishop, St. Anthony, stood at the staircase connecting the two different stories and watched as the Nighthawk deacons rushed about. Many of them wore red gloves. As a spokesperson for the Church of Evernight in the kingdom's capital, St. Anthony had a clean-shaven face. His face didn't betray his mood, and his deep black eyes similarly hid any upheavals he had. But everyone who passed by him would feel their souls tremble as an indescribable sense of horror arose in their hearts. Your Grace, an inventory count has been made. None of the mysticism ingredients are missing, including the potion main ingredients and beyonder characteristics. Your Grace, all the potion formulas are in their original locations. It can be preliminarily determined that no one had gone through them in the last 8 hours. Your Grace, all of the prisoners imprisoned on the first level are accounted for. None of them escaped, nor did anyone pass away. Your Grace, none of the information or books suffered any damage or were moved. Your Grace, the Grade 2 and Grade 3 sealed artifacts are all present. None of them have been taken away. Your Grace, the 3 Grade 1 sealed artifacts remain in their sealed states. None of them show signs of having left their confines. Your Grace, the core seal remains intact and didn't suffer any damage. Your Grace, it has been confirmed that there are no new items in here. There are no remnant setups that bring about danger. Your Grace, we didn't find the enemy who disguised himself as a keeper. He seems to have evaporated into thin air. One deacon after another came over to make a report as the matter gradually turned somewhat odd. They found it unimaginable that a scheming and powerful beyonder would take such an immense risk, and set up such a tight plan, and use all kinds of means to pass through Cheney's Gate. Yet, nothing was taken, and the perpetrator had left after circling the area once. This made it seem like the person was only trying to prove themselves, or it was someone who had specially come to find flaws in the surveillance of Cheney's Gate for the church. The deacon who led a Red Gloves team surveyed the area and deliberated as he came up with a theory. Your Grace, could it be the requirements of an advancement ritual of some sequence? Having been on a mission to capture devils, he was accustomed to making such guesses. And from Sequence 5, different pathways and different sequences had different advancement rituals. The ones that the Church of Evernight was aware of wasn't a large number. If that were the case, Soas could already see the infiltrator's mockery grin that said, "I'm free to go anywhere, even if it's the Church of Evernight's Cheney's Gate. It's no different from a department store. Those Nighthawks will only become raged after the matter, feeling useless. He has to be caught." Soas silently clenched his red-gloved hand. St. Anthony was just about to say something when Nighthawk Deacon, Daily Simone, raised a second possibility. Perhaps the infiltrator had attempted to take some sealed artifact away, and suffered the negative effects. He died on the spot and was cleanly devoured? St. Anthony nodded in thought and said, "I'll head to basement 3 to take a look." With that said, he steadily walked to basement 2, and in a secret location, activated the path to basement 3. The other deacons were lacking in rank or clearance, so all they could do was wait in their spots. St. Anthony quickly arrived at basement 3, which didn't span too big an area. He basically confirmed that sealed artifacts 1 to 29 and 1 to 80 hadn't undergone any abnormal changes. Following the strict protocols, he observed 1 to 80 with 1 to 29, and found 0 to 17 lying inside with eyes half open, just like always. During this process, St. Anthony approached thrice and opened a distance from it thrice. Sometimes he changed where he stood, and at other times, he cloaked himself in the darkness of the night. He didn't dare skip the necessary steps. Even as a saint, he didn't dare belittle any of the items in here, ignoring the powers that would break out of its vessel, temporary causing the seal on 0 to 17, even 1 to 29 and 1 to 80, which were rather dangerous items, to become ineffective. St. Anthony didn't wish to degenerate into an amnesiac who had to relearn how to eat and drink, much less become part of a dream that existed between reality and illusions. There's nothing wrong. Anthony heaved a silent sigh of relief. He began restoring the two sealed artifacts to their original states. A few minutes later, the Nighthawk deacon saw the Archbishop return. The infiltrator might have died from touching a sealed artifact, St. Anthony said, his pronunciation of died being somewhat muffled. He didn't give any additional explanations as he instructed. Regardless, this matter needs to be investigated. The infiltrator might have a partner. To be able to infiltrate St. Samuel Cathedral without causing a stir, it means that the target is very familiar with this place and is familiar with the recent duty shifts of the keepers. He's very familiar with how Nighthawks handle and take over matters, and has the ability or an item to change his appearance. In addition, he had obtained the help from a Beyonder with a sacred Evernight pathway item, or has one himself. Putting all these conditions together, investigate the servants and priests to see if they have encountered any indistinct spirit channeling or enticement. Check if the bishops have betrayed the goddess, as well as the believers who have recently come to the cathedral on a regular basis. At the same time, check on all the believers and the surroundings of their residences. Perhaps they had unexpectedly divulged something and had something stolen. I'll carry out the investigations pertaining to you. Also, find the missing servant and see if there are any clues. Yes, Your Grace, Soest and the other Nighthawk deacons answered in unison. In the office with a tense mood, Leonard Mitchell wasn't having his feet up on the table like usual. He sat very properly and wore a rather solemn expression. This was the second time he had encountered a matter that targeted items behind Cheney's gate. It invoked the memories that he buried deep inside his heart. And more importantly, he had encountered the fake keeper before without realizing the problem. If I were a little stronger and had better observation skills, perhaps it might not have. Leonard Mitchell's lips pursed tightly as he looked at the documents in front of him, but he wasn't reading a single word. This continued until his teammates entered. That keeper has awoken. He didn't see the infiltrator and only knew that he encountered the possession ability of a wraith. The red glove that entered said to everyone in the room, "How can a wraith move about inside the cathedral?" Many red gloves raised the question, but no one had an answer. Perhaps that wraith believes in the goddess. Leonard mumbled inwardly. While no one was paying attention to him in the corner, he suppressed his voice and seemed to mutter, "Old man, didn't you discover anything abnormal back then?" The slightly aged voice sounded in his mind. "It's not like I'll observe the outside world all the time, especially when I'm near Cheney's gate." Leonard didn't dare ask further as he joined in the discussion with his teammates. Before long, the Red Gloves team captain, Soest, entered the room and threw a stack of dossiers on the desk. "These are the targets we need to investigate. The bishops have provided the names of the believers who have frequently come to the cathedral recently." Leonard glanced at it, and towards the back was a dossier with a familiar name, Dwayne Dantes. This old fellow that survived from the Fourth Epoch came to a nearby street for less than 2 months, and Cheney's gate was infiltrated? Isn't that too much of a coincidence? Besides, he has been frequently coming to St. Samuel Cathedral. He might be observing the situation and figuring out the patterns. Old man's excuse wasn't too convincing, but if the infiltrator was Dwayne Dantes, then everything makes sense. He's afraid that he would expose himself, and pretended not to discover anything abnormal. Leonard's mind instantly filled with many ideas as he asked in deliberation, "Captain Soest, what did the infiltrator take? What clues did he leave behind?" Soest surveyed the room and said, "Nothing was taken or left behind. It was like no one stepped inside. His Grace suspects that he died or was vaporized from contact with some sealed artifact. Our priority is to find his partner. No, Dwayne Dantes wouldn't die that easily. He's a monster who has lived since the Fourth Epoch. However, why did he carry out the infiltration?" Leonard frowned slightly as he hesitated for a moment. Then he proactively included Dwayne Dantes into the investigation targets for himself and 2 other teammates. After the Red Gloves and local Nighthawks began taking action, Leonard found an excuse to head to the washroom first. He suppressed his voice and asked, "What are your thoughts about Dwayne Dantes? He didn't expose his parasites, lie." The elderly voice chuckled and said, "Didn't I tell you? I don't know much about him. I only know that there's something special about him. His aura has something ancient about it. However, the case you previously investigated gave me some inspiration. I suspect that Dwayne Dantes might be related to that matter. He might be a proxy of some existence. What matter? Which existence? Leonard muttered softly in surprise. In his mind, the ancient voice replied with an odd tone. The fool that doesn't belong to this era. 160 Buckland Street. Klein had his breakfast and returned to the balcony's half-open room. He sat in his reclining chair and raised his hand to rub his temples. After his tense mood subsided, Klein discovered that his mind had turned somewhat adrift. He would often see the hanging corpses in the ancient cathedral, as well as the cluster of translucent maggots that remained unclear in his deepest memories. Illusory voices would seem to constantly echo in his ears. Hornacis. Phlegria. Although I had quickly cut the connection with my marionette, I had suffered some of the effects. My soul has been slightly corrupted, as expected of a real mythical creature. After the preliminary investigations are done, I'll have to find a way to resolve the remnant problems. Klein slowly heaved a sigh of relief and used cogitation to calm himself. Chapter 847. The name hidden in the dossiers. A carriage passed by Buckland Street as Leonard Mitchell and two Red Gloves teammates discussed the target they were investigating this time, Dwayne Dantes. I still haven't had any direct contact with this gentleman. I've only investigated his servants and neighbors. Cindy, who had long wine-red hair, introduced her findings. For now, it has been confirmed that Dwayne Dantes has acted the same since last night to this morning. He went to his bedroom to sleep at 11 and finished washing up at 7:30 in the morning. At times he would have some supper and end the day after midnight. At times he would wake up before 7 and head out for a stroll, but that's not the norm. Another Red Glove, Bob, nodded and said, "From this point of view, there's nothing wrong with Dwayne Dantes." Leonard Mitchell, who sat in a seemingly casual manner, immediately said with a smile, "But the reverse can also be true. According to what we've currently gathered, the missing servant was likely replaced between 11:20 and 11:35 last night. The infiltrator entered Cheney's gate at 6 in the morning, and we discovered the problem at 7:20 a.m. without finding the target. It can thus be said that during the infiltration, Dwayne Dantes was sleeping and lacked an alibi." "What you say makes sense." Cindy glanced at Leonard in surprise. Her impression of this teammate of hers was one who often had a judgment or question that pointed at the core of the problem. However, he seldom described his logic in great detail. He was more like a desultory poet who occasionally had epiphanies. Bob, who had a sharp chin, frowned as he shook his head. If that's the case, everyone on this name list cannot be cleared of suspicion. They were sleeping with no one watching them. Even if they have wives or husbands, they would similarly be sleeping at such times. Also, I don't believe an infiltrator would be so bold. He had already entered Cheney's gate and managed to successfully escape, completing an unimaginable feat. Yet he stays nearby and hasn't abandoned his identity or gone far away. How is this possible? The risk involved cannot be predicted unless he's also planning something else. Or he can't bear to part with certain things. But what can compare with infiltrating Cheney's gate? What can compare with those sealed artifacts, ingredients, and formulas? If I didn't know that Dwayne Dantes was problematic in the first place, I would have come to the same conclusion. Leonard had already thought of an explanation as he crossed his right leg. I'm just saying why we can't so easily strike off Dwayne Dantes from the suspects. Besides, Captain Soest has said it. The infiltrator might have already died behind Cheney's gate. Even if Dwayne Dantes isn't involved, he might very well be an accomplice. Don't you find it too much of a coincidence? He moved in for less than 2 months, and the church encountered something that might never happen in centuries. Besides, he has been visiting St. Samuel Cathedral too frequently. He had ample opportunities to figure out the corresponding situation. Also, during this period of time, there was a strange sewer explosion along Buckland Street. Cindy bunched up her long wine-red hair and said, "You've convinced me. This should be a target that we put our focus on." Bob pulled at the ends of his left palm's red glove and said, "There are indeed many coincidences. However, coincidences might not be equivalent to problems. Even if Dwayne Dantes goes to the cathedral daily and listens to the bishop's preachings, all he could do is understand the layout and not obtain deeper information, such as when the keepers will head to Cheney's Gate, and how the handover is done with the Nighthawks. Therefore, he's more likely to be one of the accomplices," Leonard said with a shrug. He similarly didn't understand how Dwayne Dantes would understand the internal protocols of the Nighthawks so well. Cindy echoed, "Regardless, we have to do a deeper investigation. Shall we wait till noon and directly enter Dwayne Dantes's dream to question him? He has the habit of taking afternoon naps." Leonard raised his right hand and waved it gently. "There's no need to be in such a hurry. It's not like we've never done any routine inspections in the past or entered his dreams, but we didn't discover anything wrong. If there really is nothing wrong with him, we wouldn't gain anything from entering his dream again. If there's a problem with him, the fact that he didn't expose himself back, then means he has the means to resist an inquiry during the dream. We will still be fooled by him if we enter his dream again. Therefore, we should monitor him and see what kind of people he interacts with, so as to prevent him from escaping while waiting for Desi's response about this tycoon's true identity. Once we discover any clues, we will request to use a higher-level investigation method than questioning him in dreams." Cindy was once again surprised as she couldn't help but joke, "It's rare to see you analyze the situation so seriously." Furthermore, his thought processes were extremely clear. Leonard fell silent and gave a self-deprecating comment. "Perhaps it's because I've encountered something similar." Instantly, Cindy felt that Leonard's green eyes had turned darker. She didn't speak further. "Let's take turns to monitor Dwayne Dantes. I'll go first." "All right." Leonard nodded and turned to Bob. "Get the case files on the sewer explosion. Let's see if we can discover any problems. I'll head back to read through the corresponding dossiers and see if there are any other abnormalities on this street." After splitting the work, the three red gloves began their work. Leonard returned to St. Samuel Cathedral's basement and obtained the information involving Buckland Street and the cases that the Aurora Order had actively or passively involved themselves in for the past 3 years. The latter was something that sparked off the clue provided by the parasite in him. It gave him an idea. Since the Fool's existence and the corresponding honorific name initially came from the Aurora Order, it means that the Aurora Order was involved in something or had suffered some setbacks. It might be related to the organization that believes in the Fool. After returning to the office, Leonard held back his desultory attitude as he very seriously read through the thick dossiers. In the dossiers related to the Aurora Order, there was the Lenivas case he was most familiar with. This true creator's descent had failed terribly because of some baffling report. A mysterious person had appeared to kill the main criminal. He was suspected to be related to hero bandit Black Emperor. As he targeted evil criminals, he would scatter tarot cards over the target's corpse. That person wasn't able to do it for Desire Apostle Jason Beria only because Leonard had rushed over too quickly. Similarly, Leonard once again saw the name, Sherlock Moriarty, appear in the periphery of the case. Aurora Order's Mr. X was assassinated at the gathering he convened. There were traces of powers at the demigod level left at the scene. At this point in time, Dwayne Dantes had already arrived in Backland. It matches perfectly. Aurora Order's Mr. A and the Demonist sect cooperated to create the Great Smog of Backland. This person vanished as a result. Aurora Order's Mr. A had assassinated the Intis ambassador. Leonard read case after case, but he didn't find anything of use. He rubbed his temples and decided to attack it from a different angle. He began from the cases related to hero bandit Black Emperor. Lenivas case. First murder scene with the tarot cards thrown as a ritual. And the Fool is the beginning of the tarot cards. Capham's case. From the strength and level showcased by hero bandit Black Emperor. He won't and wouldn't mimic others. He similarly scattered tarot cards on the corpse. Desire Apostle Jason Beria. I saw hero bandit Black Emperor with my own eyes, preventing him from scattering the cards in time. Apart from major events and evil criminals, what other connection do these three cases have? Leonard had previously considered the relevant questions, and was certain that Detective Sherlock Moriarty had been partially involved in the Lenevis and Clapham cases. Then what about the Desire Apostle case? Leonard found the addendum and began leafing through them. Finally, he spotted a line in an inconspicuous spot. People attacked involved Isengard Stanton, Sherlock Moriarty. Leonard's expression slowly turned excited as though he had discovered a breakthrough. He flipped through the Aurora Order dossier and didn't miss out any of the names involved. He kept expanding his search and requested for all the dossiers that involved every name. Aurora Order's Mr. A assassinated the Intis ambassador. The Intis ambassador was in charge of the conflict over the Difference Engine manuscripts. The clues to the manuscripts came from a spy who usually acted as a private detective. It is reported that another private detective was embroiled in this matter and had nearly been killed by a gang member under the command of the Intis ambassador. Another private detective. Leonard suddenly stood up as he left St. Samuel Cathedral and headed for the police station that handled the case back then. Although most of the dossiers had been taken away by MI9, Leonard still found the name of the person who had made the police report. Sherlock Moriarty. I now have reason to believe that this great detective was also involved in the Great Smog of Backlund. Among the various people who are involved, his name appears right at the periphery of the matter. He and Dwayne Dantes all belong to a secret organization that believes in the fool? Leonard thought as the corners of his lips curled up. He decided to immediately search for more information to verify his conjecture. 160 Buckland Street, inside the master bedroom. Klein didn't have any nighthawks enter his dream during his afternoon nap, but he once again returned to the foggy town. He saw Demoness of Despair Panatia with her smile showcasing blood-colored flesh in between the gaps of her teeth. He saw her slowly being hung up as her eyes rolled back in despair before her head drooped down. The hung corpses, the horrifying gigantic mushroom, the cluster of countless translucent maggots kept appearing one after another, waking Klein up from his dream. As he rubbed his temples, Klein found that his mind was in a terrible condition. And this wasn't a problem that could be resolved by the gray fog. He fell into deep thought and entered his bathroom and arrived above the gray fog. He conjured Gehrman and made him pray. Please pass on my question to Miss Justice about when she will be free. I wish to receive some psychotherapy. Chapter 848. Getting caught in the crossfire. Backlund, Empress Borough, inside the Hall family's luxurious mansion. Audrey had just tried on 3 selections of evening gowns today, and she was sitting on a cushioned chair, wondering how they could be matched with her accessories, and which one she was more inclined towards. She also pondered over her mother's opinion. At this moment, she suddenly saw an endless grayish-white and a blurry figure watching down at everything from high above appear before her eyes. Immediately after that, she saw another figure. It was a praying figure that had been shrouded by the gray fog. Her ears resounded with the corresponding words. Instead of being alarmed, Audrey was delighted. Her unease and worry that there wasn't a tarot gathering today was instantly quelled. As expected, it was nothing. Oh, Mr. World really has a psychological problem. He must have been under immense stress recently. It's no wonder he booked an appointment in advance. Audrey sighed as she began to consider when she was free. As she pondered, she scanned the maids who were busy in her room and the golden retriever, Susie, who was sitting by the door. Audrey's lips curled up slightly in an irresistible manner as she bowed her head and secretly prayed in response. Please tell Mr. World that I'm currently free. He can determine the time and location. As long as it's not nighttime and doesn't exceed the boroughs west of Backlund. In regards to this, the golden retriever who was observing the maid's work seemed to sense someone looking at her. She suspiciously turned her head and looked in Audrey's direction. However, it failed to discover any problems. Above the gray fog, inside the palace that looked like a giant's residence. She's free at any time. Periods when it's convenient to head out. Won't leave places she's familiar with. Klein rubbed his temples as he interpreted Miss Justice's reply. His first reaction was that it was best done today or tomorrow, and to have her determine the location. Then he could use creeping hunger to teleport there, But he soon thought of a problem. Dwayne Dantes was part of the Nighthawks' investigations. It was very possible that he was being monitored. Therefore, rashly traveling could easily expose him. Wait a few days or... Klein seriously thought about it as he conjured the World Gehrman Sparrow and prayed once again. Please inform Miss Justice that let's do it today. Above the gray fog. Ah. Audrey's eyes widened. She found that the answer provided by Mr. World exceeded her expectations. How was she supposed to get Susie to be her stand-in? Besides, there are many details that I'm unable to see or clearly sense while inside Mr. Fool's palace. It will seriously hamper any psychotherapy. Audrey calmed her sense of alarm as she posed her doubts from a position of viability and requested Mr. Fool to pass it on to Mr. World. Before long, she received a reply again. I will request Mr. Fool to remove those restrictions. We'll use other means to conceal our true appearances. That can be done? This is the special treatment one gets from being Mr. Fool's blessed? Our continuous communication is almost like a conversation. I've really troubled Mr. Fool. And he seems to almost allow us to indulge in it. Audrey's thoughts raced as she stopped finding excuses. All right. Let's do it between 11:30 to 12:30 tonight. She didn't believe that she would have anywhere to be alone before the end of her birthday ball. At the same time, in a building at 39 Buckland Street, Hazel was looking at the selected evening gown in boredom as she listened to her mother's repeated exhortations. She was to accompany her parents to attend Miss Audrey Hall's birthday ball. Just as Hazel's thoughts were wandering and her mind gradually turning blank, she saw a grayish-white rat appear by the door. It was frantically waving its paws. Hazel patiently listened to her mother repeat herself one more time, before finding an excuse to return to her bedroom. After she closed and locked her door, the grayish-white rat appeared from somewhere, and arrived by her feet. It sat there in a rather comical manner. I've discovered something wrong with the surroundings. The rat had sent vibrations in the air to speak with human words. Hazel wasn't surprised at that as she asked in puzzlement, "What's wrong?" The grayish-white rat raised its right forepaw and pointed out the window. There are beyonders from the Church of Evernight investigating this street. It's at a rather large scale. What are they looking for? Hazel asked with a slight frown. The grayish-white rat slowly inhaled and said, How would I know? But it's definitely something very serious. This way, they might very well discover something wrong with you. Hazel asked, feeling somewhat worried and confused. How did they make the discovery? Weren't the clues in the sewers blasted away? Weren't the corresponding problems dealt with? The grayish-white was momentarily unsure about what to say. A few seconds later, it vaguely replied, Official Beyonders have plenty of strange but effective investigation methods. In short, I'll have to deal with your dream. This is where it's easiest to divulge things. Hazel looked down at the rat as her knitted brows relaxed. All right then. Don't look so unwilling. It wasn't easy for me to accumulate this bit of strength, and now it's going to waste once again. Is this street cursed? First it was that demoness with a strange condition. Following that hero bandit Black Emperor appeared. Now there's some baffling and unknown situation that made the Nighthawks pay serious attention to this street. The grayish-white rat squeaked in frustration. At 7:30 in the evening, Hazel accompanied her parents, Member of Parliament Mocht and Lady Rihanna, to Empress Borough and entered the Hall family's residence. As it was a birthday ball today, she didn't manage to directly meet Miss Audrey Hall. All she did was quietly stay by her parents' side as they exchanged pleasantries with Earl Hall, Lady Caitlin, and Lord Hibbert Hall. To her, these respected aristocrats were, in essence, the same as commoners. Therefore, she didn't appear notably reserved. Her actions and tone were rather liberal. If it wasn't because of her mother's repeated exhortations, Hazel even believed that the beautiful dance floor, the murals with high artistic value, and the elegant and outstanding statues were more worthy of respect. As she smiled at the people she knew and didn't know, Hazel finally waited until the ball began. She saw the star of tonight's show. Miss Audrey Hall held the arms of the Earl and Earl's wife as she walked out of the room on the second floor before arriving at the railings that faced the dance floor. Hazel scanned her and habitually ignored her appearance as she observed the matching of her gown and accessories. However, her gaze wasn't able to move away. On the chandelier hanging high above, whale oil candles produced light that came with dreamy colors. When shining on the 18-year-old Audrey, it made her emerald-like eyes, pure and indescribable face, and lustrous gold hair seem to glow. It made her gown and accessories lose their luster. Hazel was momentarily caught in a daze. She failed to hear what Earl Hall had said until the melody filled the floor as she snapped out of her daze when Audrey Hall began the opening dance with the Earl. The always proud her had suddenly felt a little inferior. She felt that even if this striking lady didn't possess any beyond her powers, there was no way Audrey was inferior to her. Hazel pursed her lips and looked around. She realized that everyone's gaze had been grabbed. The only difference was that they all had different feelings about the situation. Phew. Hazel heaved a sigh of relief. That night, she didn't act that arrogantly again. However, she yearned to leave at every minute of the night. She wanted to head home to busy herself with her matters to obtain more magical and powerful abilities. Finally, the ball came to an end as Hazel's family bade farewell to the family and walked to the door. On the way out, Hazel couldn't help but look back. She saw Miss Audrey standing along the sides of the dance floor with a faint and beautiful smile as she expressed her gratitude to each and every guest that was about to leave. She seemed to remain under the spotlight. After the end of the birthday ball, Audrey took off her accessories and changed into her sleeping gown before entering her bathroom. As she looked at the white steam emanate with her bathrobe beside her, Audrey wasn't in a rush to soak herself inside. She first sat in the corner and prayed to Mr. Fool to indicate that she was ready. In about 10 seconds, she saw crimson light surge at her like a tidal wave, drowning her. Above the gray fog, Audrey appeared by the side of the long bronze table. This time, she didn't see Mr. Fool, who was enshrouded in gray fog. She discovered an ancient confessional. It was a brown crate that was 1.5 times the height of a person. There were doors on both sides, and a wooden plank separated the area in between them. I thought Mr. World would request Mr. Fool to conjure a wall, which we will use to communicate across. Although it's essentially the same, a confessional is cramped and dark. He really doesn't know how to consider a lady's feelings. Yes, I would find it odd if Mr. World did that. As Audrey suffused a smile, she walked to the ajar door of the confessional. She bent her back and entered before sitting down with her legs bent sideways. After closing the wooden door, Audrey, who was treating a patient in the true sense of the word for the first time, suddenly felt a little excited. Immersed in darkness, the environment and her mood made her loosen up from the many rules she had to abide by. She curled her lips and reached out her fingers and gently tapped on the wooden partition. "Hello, Mr. World, are you there?" Sitting cross-legged opposite her, Klein was infected by Miss Justice's cheerful tone. His emotions relaxed as he said, "You may begin." This time he didn't use the gray fog to enshroud himself, but had turned himself into Gairman Sparrow. Indeed, Mr. World's mental state isn't too good. He's too tense and worried. Audrey sensed him first, and then used a psychiatrist's placate. A gentle, invisible wave emanated over as Klein instantly felt a cool, refreshing morning breeze blow at him during a hot summer day. The frustrations and feverish feelings within him suddenly vanished. Seeing Mr. World having made an obvious recovery, she secretly heaved a sigh of relief and asked softly, "Have you had any nightmares lately?" Chapter 849. Consultation Fees Nightmare? Klein deliberated for 2 seconds and said, "Yes. I dream of a town that's enshrouded in fog. The crimson moon in the sky would be clear and blurred at random. In the middle of the town is a black cathedral. Corpses are hung up inside. They wear clothes from different eras as they sway in the wind and produce strange sounds. Apart from that, there's a beautiful lady whose gaps in her teeth were filled with blood-colored human flesh. A mushroom man formed of countless tiny mushrooms." To treat his psychological problems, Klein reconstructed his dream in a rather complete manner. However, he didn't say that he had encountered those things in reality, nor divulge that he knew the beautiful lady's identity and the strange mushroom's origins. At the same time, he hid the existence of the cluster of translucent maggots and Zeratul. Audrey listened intently and seriously. Based on her beyonder intuition and knowledge from mysticism and psychological, she said as she contemplated, "Mr. World, I can imagine such a terrifying and sinister dream. I can also experience the immense horror that it brings you." Seeing that there wasn't any rebuttal from the other side of the wooden partition, Audrey grew in confidence. She silently did another round of placate and began guiding. The horror that appears in dreams will often stem from feelings hidden deep in one's heart. And there are only two sources of horror in one's heart. One is the unknown, and the second is what cannot be resisted. The terrifying things you see in your dream are only superficial. What you are really afraid of is what they represent and symbolize, the truth hidden behind them. As she spoke, Audrey suddenly asked, "What is it?" Klein was gradually relaxing and scrutinizing himself as he took in Miss Justice's gentle and sweet voice. When he suddenly heard this question, he subconsciously answered, "The existence that created all of that." He paused and hesitantly added, "They are both an unknown and also cannot be resisted." At this point, Klein knew why he was having nightmares, as well as the true reason for his terrible mental state. He instinctively felt horrified over certain matters, and instinctively had latent negative emotions. The former included the cluster of translucent maggots and Zeratul's terrifying performance. There was also the Eraser Angel's baffling actions, and the fact that using the dark sacred emblem was the key to opening the door. They separately created a mood of despair that seemed impossible to resist, as well as the feeling of not knowing who was friend or foe, and their ploys. "Yes, I'm fearful that the cluster of translucent maggots that's suspected to be a sequence one attendant of mysteries of the seer pathway. I'm fearful of Zeratul, who has accomplished an unknown objective by opening the door. I'm fearful of the goddess whose thoughts are an unknown, as well as the Eraser Angel." Klein slowly exhaled as he admitted his fears. Audrey used placate once again, and discovered that Mr. World's tense mind had essentially relaxed. She was delighted as she boldly said, "One of the biggest sources of fear is a lack of confidence. Try recalling if you had any oversight or had committed any mistakes in the related matter. This results in your spirit repeatedly warning you and hinting to you. It eventually transformed into part of the nightmare." Oversight and mistakes. Warning from my spirit. Klein pondered over Miss Justice's words, and seriously began organizing the details of the matters that resulted in his horror. Soon his expression turned heavy, bit by bit, as he discovered a problem. "I swore an oath with the goddess bearing witness via the holy sword. Although I hadn't become a clown, with the gray fog's powers yet to have entered the real world, preventing me from being noticed by special deities, demigods, and spirit world creatures. However, I couldn't fool fate, which would also be beyonders of the monster pathway. And the goddess has another title. She is the Empress of Misfortune and Horror. She wields control over misfortune, and is one of the deities in the domain of fate. Therefore, I was noticed from back then." Klein's heart sank bit by bit as the horror that stemmed from the unknown was greatly alleviated. He didn't reply, nor did he wait for Miss Justice to speak again. He switched to asking, "If you will face one or even many difficult-to-challenge enemies, what would you do?" Audrey wasn't annoyed by her patient's question. Instead, she felt that it was a good sign. After some deliberation, she said, "First avoid them and hide. Try harder to improve yourself. What if the time won from avoiding and hiding isn't enough to make you grow to a level that is sufficient enough to face your enemies?" Klein pressed, "What if the gap between the two is difficult to bridge?" Audrey answered him seriously while also consoling him, "Find enough helpers." Helpers. Names suddenly flashed across Klein's mind as his heart felt a lot more settled. He then continued asking, "What if the enemies cannot be resisted even with helpers? What if there are helpers who are plotting something that might be beneficial to you, but they might also bring you harm?" Audrey drew a blank, and after a few seconds of thought she replied, "You can pray to a deity." She nearly said to the world, "You can seek Mr. Fool's help." And from the question and answer session, Audrey was able to confirm a matter. The mental problems that Mr. World was suffering stemmed from powerful and terrifying enemies, but there was a worry that, at a deeper level, the helpers had unknown stances. Pray to a deity. Klein didn't dare to directly say, what if deities couldn't resolve it because the thoughts of deities are even harder to fathom? After all, this was the fool's kingdom, and he was a blessed. He organized his words and said, deities can only provide help in certain areas. And what if that isn't enough? Audrey originally wanted to say that there was always a way and that good was bound to defeat evil, but she couldn't convince herself of it. She couldn't provide any relevant case studies, so eventually she pursed her lips and said, I don't know. In the confessional, it was a still darkness. The two temporarily stopped speaking as they fell into their respective inner struggles. Finally, Audrey broke the silence and looked at the wooden partition. Regardless, something needs to be done. Work hard at it. You can't just give up like that and not put up a fight. That's right. At the very least, I still have many secrets and things to rely on. Klein closed his eyes as he leaned on the wooden plank. His thoughts slowly rewound from the most recent events, as he was no longer constantly tense and often frustrated. Audrey sensed his change and immediately added a placate. With that, Klein's mental condition was completely restored back to normal. I feel much better. Thank you for your treatment. What kind of consultation fee do you want? Klein offered. Actually, I should be the one thanking you for providing me an opportunity to handle a case. Audrey didn't really wish to collect any fees as she looked at the wooden partition in the darkness. She couldn't help but recall Mr. World's usual gloominess and coldness, as well as his experienced and ruthless demeanor. His mental problems likely also have to do with his personality. Audrey suddenly had an idea as she smiled. The consultation fee that I charge isn't much at all. Yeah, wish me happiness. What's going on? Klein was momentarily stunned. He nearly forgot he was wearing the facade of Sparrow. This was a request he had never heard of before. Klein hesitated for a moment. Finally, he pretended to coldly say with the world's identity, since you requested, I wish you happiness. Audrey's smile turned into a beaming smile. I wish you happiness too, Mr. World. Don't always keep everything inside. Smile more and be happier. It can eliminate most of the latent problems. All right, your mental problems have been resolved, but you will need a follow-up appointment in a few days or by next week. Klein was at a loss for an answer as he tersely acknowledged an affirmation. Then he heard the door on the other side creak open. With the fool's angle, he saw Miss Justice retreat from the confessional and straighten her body. After sending her to the real world, Klein didn't dare stay above the gray fog for too long. He quickly left and got into bed. At that moment, his mental condition had been restored. With his body and mind at ease, he realized something. He had digested quite a bit of his marionettist potion. The progress had surpassed his expectations. This is because I relied on my marionette to fool a demigod, Panatia, and orchestrated her and Mr. A to complete my planned-out performance at the Foggy Town? Therefore, apart from trying to hide behind the shadows, and let every marionette have their own persona to make it more realistic, the marionettist principles include: use one's marionette as a guide to control the enemy to play the role of a puppet? Klein thought as he muttered inwardly in thought. He believed that he could digest the potion before the end of the year. He exhaled with mixed feelings as he turned his head and looked at the crimson moonlight that penetrated the curtains as he silently said, that missing servant should have been found. The clues I left behind should have been discovered as well. In the basement of St. Samuel Cathedral, Leonard, Cindy, Bob, and company looked at Captain Soest, who had returned from a meeting, as they patiently waited for him to introduce new clues. Soest drank a mouthful of aromatic coffee and said, the missing servant has been found. And in the room he was left in, there were some clothes left behind by the infiltrator. It has been confirmed that it belongs to the crazy adventurer, Sparrow, who had previously been active at sea. Why did it involve another crazy adventurer? Leonard was somewhat puzzled as he directly asked, when did he come to Backlund? No one knows. The only thing that can be confirmed is that this crazy adventurer had appeared at sea in the recent few weeks and had hunted a few pirates. Soas said in an unhurried tone. The Church of Storms knows more. MI9 also seems to know quite a bit. The higher-ups will send people to liaise with them. Just as Soas finished his briefing, a telegram was sent over. It came from the Nighthawks in Desi. The content, which was decoded, read, Dwayne Dantes' present identity is fake. In the past 10 years he spent in the southern continent, he had relied on adventuring to amass a significant amount of wealth. Further confirmation will require some time. As this place is very chaotic and there are often wars, the jurisdiction of zones are frequently changed. Chapter 850. The devil is in the details sounds like a contrived story. Ever since the new sea route was discovered, there has been no end to stories of people becoming rich from taking risks. Soas casually commented on the content of the telegram. As he thought, he looked towards a particular red glove. I recall that we had investigated Dwayne Dantes before, and had an exchange with him in his dream. Yes. The red glove who was responsible for the task nodded and replied. I didn't directly ask him about such matters, but I could tell that Dwayne Dantes was very familiar with the southern continent. He had plenty of experience there. Haha, that might be information that Dwayne Dantes deliberately revealed to you. Leonard had his doubts regarding the contents of the telegram, believing that this was another layer of disguise from an undying monster who had lived since the fourth epoch. However, he didn't inform his teammates about his conjectures, because he had no basis for them. Soas didn't pay great attention to the matter as he said, Do you have any problems with the clues related to Gehrman Sparrow? Since this crazy adventurer was still at sea in recent weeks, when did he come to Backland? As a nightmare, Cindy repeated her doubts. What I'm concerned about isn't the exact time, but whether he has the time to travel to Backland. After all, we're rather far from the sea. Soas nodded gently and said, In the meeting, a deacon raised this question. According to the time and venue of Gehrman Sparrow's last sighting, he normally has no way to arrive in Backland last night and complete an infiltration. Of course, I'm referring to normal circumstances. The missing servant told us that when he was sweeping the square, he suddenly lost control of his body. He froze on the spot and was unable to cry for help. Then he saw bright colors like an abstract oil painting, and he felt that his body was floating upwards. Later, he lost consciousness, and after awakening, he found himself in a room in East Borough. The former matches with the keeper's description of being possessed by a wraith. The latter is suspected to be a traveler's teleport. If it really is teleport, then Gehrman Sparrow can appear in Backland at any moment. As elites of the Nighthawks, the Red Gloves knew about the various Beyonder pathways far better than their colleagues which were at the same level. They were no strangers to wraiths and travelers. After listening to the captain's explanation, another Red Glove added in thought, It's rumored that Admiral of Blood, who was hunted by Gehrman Sparrow, is a wraith. The details matched. And as for Gehrman Sparrow being able to obtain the powers to become a wraith, it wasn't unacceptable. The easiest method was to find an artisan to make one's prey into a mystical item. Cindy recalled even more information with this stimulus. It said that Gehrman Sparrow has the ability to change his appearance, and the infiltrator had disguised himself as the keeper. Another detail matched. Excellent thinking. Soas raised his hand to rub his temples. According to these details, we can come to a preliminary consensus that the infiltrator is Gehrman Sparrow. And this way, the name list we came up with might be erroneous. Gehrman Sparrow doesn't need a companion to frequently come to the cathedral to pray to gather information. He can change his appearance every day and enter to figure out the situation. This will be more indiscreet than using a companion. As the largest and most holy church of Evernight Cathedral in Backland, the number of believers that came to St. Samuel Cathedral on a daily basis was too numerous to count. No bishop could remember every unfamiliar face that they once met. That also means that the names we have here are meaningless? Leonard raised his hand to rub his brows, sounding rather desultory. That's somewhat obvious. Our focus now should be on Gehrman Sparrow. The other targets can be placed aside as we perform the most basic level of surveillance. Having said that, Sois clapped and said, "All right, get busy." Leonard didn't have any objections. He happened to hope to find the machinery hive mind, mandated punishers, and MI9 to gather some information. On Tuesday morning, Klein woke up naturally, feeling relaxed and calm. He had the feeling of joyful emotions slowly coming to life. A psychiatrist's beyond her powers are quite useful after all. It really matches the extremely infectious optimism that Miss Justice brings with her. Klein got out of bed and drew the curtains. He leisurely took in the scenery outside and the scattering golden sunlight. He regained his drive and began formulating his plans for the next couple months, and even the year. First, get a new marionette. Second, use the identity of Dwayne Dantes and the control over a marionette to orchestrate scripts to expedite the digestion of the potion. Third, during this process, slowly gather the ingredients needed for the Bizarro Sorcerer potion. In that regard, I can ask Little Son about the Bizarro Bane to see if he has any clues. I'll seek Mr. Azek's help regarding the Spirit World Plunderer. After all, the underworld is part of the spirit world. Fourth, I'll continue investigating the Great Smog of Backland and find the true culprit. This includes Ensanguil, as well as the demigod that killed Crazy Captain. There aren't any targets more suitable than them for my advancement ritual. However, I have to be careful of 0-08. I have to constantly keep watch of any intentional coincidences. I'll just dabble in the matter in an ordinary manner and mainly provide support. The dangerous investigations can be handed to Demonis Trissy. Klein's thought processes slowly became clear. Although he still felt worried and fearful, this no longer affected his mental state and capacity to take action. Retracting his gaze from outside the balcony, Klein walked into the bathroom and washed up. Soon he opened the door while feeling highly spirited, and he saw his valet Richardson and butler, Walter, waiting outside. The gentleman was wearing white gloves as he politely bowed and said, "Good morning, sir. There's only one item on your schedule today. It's to join an event at the East Balham Military Veterans Mess with Member of Parliament Mocked at 3 in the afternoon. He's a new Member of Parliament, so by accepting his invitation, it will also indicate your political inclinations. You still have the opportunity to be hesitant about it." Klein thought for a moment before saying, "There's no need. It's my choice." He paused and asked in an inquiring tone, "It will be my first time visiting the East Balham Military Veterans Mess. What should I take note of?" "Praise their work that they have established in East Balham. Use this opportunity to make some donations. There's no need to give too much or little. £500 is a rather suitable sum." Walter provided his opinion. £500? Seriously, no matter which circle I enter, I'll have to spend large sums of money. Sigh, this is because Dwayne Dantes doesn't have any birthright or background. He can only open a path with cash. Klein nodded gently and agreed with his butler's suggestion. At the same time, he quickly did a count of his present assets. The artisan hasn't completed the work regarding the ocean songster, but the money for Mentor of Confusion and Druid has been obtained. That's a total of £16,000. With the cash I originally had on hand, subtracting the £13,000 I used to purchase 3% of the Coin Company's shares, as well as the daily expenses of a tycoon's household, and the donations at the cathedral, there's still £23,985 and 5 gold coins left. In addition, I still owe Miss Messenger 3,413 gold coins. £500 has already exceeded 2% of the cash I have on hand. Klein didn't speak further as he walked out of his bedroom, going to the second floor where the dining room was in order to have his breakfast. In the basement of St. Samuel Cathedral, Leonard Mitchell returned to his office earlier than his teammates. He had already obtained the relevant information and had learned of an inconspicuous matter. Prince Edisac, who passed away in the Great Smog of Backland, had once hired a private detective to investigate the death of equestrian teacher, Talum Dumont. And that private detective's name was Sherlock Moriarty. As expected, there are hints of him being involved with the Great Smog of Backland. Leonard was delighted as he excitedly ruffled his hair. Following that, he pounded down at the documents on his desk with his fist, planning to seek out even more clues. However, he suddenly fell silent for about 8 seconds before raising his cup in embarrassment and drank a mouthful of coffee. He mumbled inwardly, "What did I want to do? I forgot about it after the pounding." After some careful recall, Leonard finally recalled what it was. He pulled out his drawer and took out a deck of tarot cards. Then he found the Fool card and placed it on a piece of paper. On it he wrote 3 names: Sherlock Moriarty, Gehrman Sparrow, Dwayne Dantes. After some hesitation, Leonard drew a line linking the 3 names to the Fool card, indicating that they might very well be members of a secret organization that believed in the Fool. Among them, he was most unsure of Gehrman Sparrow's identity as he wrote a question mark. Later, Leonard took out the Emperor card and stuck it beside the name, Sherlock Moriarty. He labeled it, suspected to be Gehrman Sparrow and Dwayne Dantes each correspond to a card? Leonard muttered silently. He took out the crazy adventurer's records and began reading them seriously. Suddenly, he found a date very familiar. Early January. Gehrman Sparrow's first appearance was in early January. No way. Leonard drew a gasp as he flipped through another set of documents. At the end of it were the words. At the end of December, Sherlock Moriarty left Backlund and headed south for a vacation. He has yet to return. End of December. Early January. Backlund. Pritz Harbor. Gehrman Sparrow can change his appearance. No way. Leonard mumbled inwardly as he drew a dotted equality sign between Sherlock Moriarty and Gehrman Sparrow. This great detective is the key. Leonard found Sherlock Moriarty's portrait that he had drawn via a ritual as he carefully looked at it. After considering the point that looks could be changed, he began imagining the detective in different disguises. As he did it, Leonard's gaze froze bit by bit as he couldn't help but frown. You're tuning in to the Limei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.